That autumn afternoon passed in silence, as if the entire town of Maple Glen was holding its breath for something that hadn't yet happened. In a small wooden house tucked beneath the shadow of ancient oak trees, Evelyn Carter sat motionless on the porch steps, her eyes hollow, fixed on the empty space in front of her. Beside her lay an old dog collar, Ranger's, a German shepherd, a silent witness to all that had been lost. Evelyn had once been an army medic, serving 2 tours in Afghanistan. The war hadn't just left scars on her body, it had carved deep wounds into her mind. Every night, the echoes of gunfire and explosions still rang through her sleep, jerking her awake in cold panic, heart racing, breath caught in her throat. For a long time, Evelyn couldn't make it through a single day without falling apart. Then came Ranger, a specially trained service dog for veterans with PTSD. Ranger saved Evelyn in ways no human ever could. He didn't need to speak. He just lay beside her, gently resting his head in her hand whenever the terror came. Ranger tuned in to every breath she took, every tiny shift in her body, like he could feel the pain she never spoke aloud. Ranger became the lifeline Evelyn never dared believe she deserved. Slowly, light returned to her life. Evelyn moved to Maple Glen, a quiet little town nestled between the forested hills. She planted herbs in the backyard, took morning walks with Ranger, and even started dating Derek Holt, a local mechanic with a gentle voice and a smile that crinkled at the corners. In the beginning, Derek seemed kind. He fixed up the porch, tossed sticks for Ranger in the yard, and told Evelyn she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. But as the weeks turned into months, that kindness faded. In its place grew something colder, something tight and bitter. Derek started complaining about how much time Evelyn spent with Ranger. "You treat that dog like your damn husband," he muttered during one of their arguments. Evelyn tried to explain. Ranger wasn't just a dog. He was a part of her soul. But Derek didn't get it, or maybe he didn't want to. And in his eyes, something changed. Something that looked less like jealousy of another man and more like envy of a dog. He grew snappier, more irritable when Ranger was around. Once, Evelyn caught him moving Ranger's water bowl away from its usual spot. Another time, Derek locked the porch door while it rained, leaving Ranger stranded outside. The sense of unease seeped through the house like mold creeping up the walls. That night, the rain came hard. Sheets of water lashed at the windows, and the wind screamed through the cracks. Tree branches whipped against the wooden siding like warnings from the dark. Evelyn and Derek fought again, louder and fiercer than ever before. Derek slammed his fist on the table, grabbed his truck keys, and shouted, "We're done. I'm taking him with me. Let's see how you live without him." Evelyn froze. Ranger immediately stepped in front of her, his sharp eyes locked on Derek. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just watched, reading every move like he was assessing a threat. But before Evelyn could react, Derek lunged for the leash hanging by the door. "Ranger!" Evelyn screamed and ran after him, but Derek had already yanked open the door and was dragging Ranger into the storm. The dog didn't bite, didn't resist. It seemed as though Ranger understood that retaliating would only cause Evelyn further harm. She slipped on the wet floor, slamming her side against the table. Pain shot through her ribs. By the time she scrambled up, Derek and Ranger were gone, swallowed by the downpour. She ran outside barefoot, cold rain slicing into her skin, shouting Ranger's name into the night. The red taillights of Derek's pickup blurred in the distance, shrinking, vanishing. The roar of the engine faded into the rain until there was only silence. Evelyn stumbled down the road, but her legs gave out, crumpling beneath her. Her chest heaved, not from the cold, but from something like a part of her soul having just been ripped away. She collapsed in the yard, soaked and trembling, her cries broken and raw. "Ranger, please, come back." Only the rain answered. That night, Evelyn didn't sleep. She sat curled up in the hallway, staring out the door Derek had left wide open. Ranger's water bowl still sat in the kitchen corner. His old blanket was cold and untouched. The house, once quiet and warm, now echoed with emptiness. Evelyn drifted from room to room like a ghost, touching the spots where Ranger used to lie and gently opening the back door, hoping that somehow he would be there. By morning, she went to the police. The officer spoke kindly, but his words were no comfort. "Without proper ownership documents, ma'am, this might be considered a civil dispute. It's unlikely we can treat it as a criminal matter." Evelyn said nothing. She just pressed her lips so tightly they bled. Ranger wasn't property. Ranger was family. She went home broken. But somewhere deep inside, a tiny flame still burned. She knew Ranger hadn't left her. He had been taken, forced away. And if he were still alive, he would try to come back. In that final, just before Derek's truck, Ranger had turned his head. His eyes met hers, quiet and aching, but not hopeless. There was something in that look. A promise. He would not forget. He would find his way back. And Evelyn swore, with everything she had left in her, that she would find Ranger. She was determined to find Ranger no matter how long it took. Tomorrow, a month, a lifetime. Even if no one believed her, she would persevere. Even if she had to travel this road alone, she would persevere. She would walk it anyway, one step at a time. A road called hope. 2 years is a long time, especially when every day begins with hope and ends with heartbreak. For Evelyn Carter, each morning without Ranger felt like a fresh wound, a quiet reminder that even the deepest love can be torn away without warning. But Evelyn never stopped. Evelyn did not pause for even a single day. As soon as her strength allowed, she launched her search. Hundreds of flyers printed with a clear photo of Ranger went up across Maple Glen. Below the image, the words read, "Missing Canine Therapy. Do not approach. Please call immediately." She posted them on power poles, gas stations, grocery stores, and even on rusted bulletin boards in park corners. Ranger wasn't just a dog. Ranger was a piece of her. She drove to every rescue shelter within a 60-mile radius. Each time a German Shepherd came in, Evelyn would show up, heart pounding like a child hoping to find a long-lost toy. But every time, her hope was quietly extinguished by unfamiliar eyes. None of them were Ranger. She joined online groups, dog lovers forums, lost pet communities, and even niche threads on Reddit. She taught herself how to pull footage from traffic cams and how to scan satellite maps for areas Derek might have passed through. Some nights, she didn't sleep at all. She just sat there, eyes glued to her screen, combing through photo after photo, hoping for anything. Every mistaken sighting, every phone call that ended in disappointment. I think I saw a shepherd near the pine woods, cut a little deeper into her chest. But Evelyn refused to fall apart. Every morning she printed more flyers. Every time she spoke to someone new, she repeated the same line. "His name's Ranger. If you look in his eyes, you'll understand." Then came the diagnosis. She got the call from the Central Hospital. The scans showed brain tumors that were malignant, early stage. The doctors urged immediate chemotherapy. Evelyn sat in silence for a long time in the consultation room, her fingers tightly gripping the small photo of Ranger she always kept in her wallet. "How long if I don't treat it?" she asks quietly. "Less than a year," came the reply. She nodded. "Then I need to move fast. I haven't found Ranger yet." The doctors thought she was in shock. She wasn't. Evelyn was more clear-headed than ever. To her, the illness wasn't the biggest problem. What kept her up at night was wondering if Ranger was cold somewhere, or being hurt or lost, terrified and alone. That thought made her chest seize harder than any diagnosis ever could. Each time she sat through treatment, she clutched Ranger's photo in her hand. Her frail fingers trembled, veins pronounced, but she never let go. She refused high doses of morphine despite the pain, whispering, "I need my mind clear. I still have to remember the roads to find Ranger." On days when her body was too weak to rise, she crawled to the porch just to check the security, just in case Ranger came back in the night. Once, during a brutal wave of nausea, she managed to pick up a pen and shakily scribble into her journal, "Don't let today go to waste. Ranger is still out there." Treatment continued 3 sessions a week. Her body began to change, nausea, hair loss, and her skin turning pale and thin. But even on her worst days, Evelyn kept printing flyers. On better days, she drove farther out, crossing into neighboring counties. Sometimes she drove out just to meet a homeless man who might have seen a dog like that. One day she drove over 5 hours just to see a shepherd with a red collar. But it wasn't Ranger. She quietly turned the car around. No tears. She simply bit her lip until it bled. Maybe her tears had run dry. At one shelter, she met a small boy, maybe 8 years old, holding a tiny, trembling puppy. Evelyn smiled and knelt to speak with him. The boy looked at the flyer in her hand and said, "I hope you find Ranger. I think he really misses you." That simple sentence cracked something open inside her. For the first time in months, Evelyn felt something other than pain. She was reminded that even strangers could sense the sacred bond between a human and a dog. Time passed. 1 year. A year and a half passed. Evelyn had grown thin. Nearly all of her hair had disappeared. Her face hollowed, bones showing where curves once were. But her eyes still carried the same fierce fire. She began keeping a journal of her search, recording every place she'd visited, every person she'd spoken to, and every case of mistaken identity. She called it the Map of Hope. And it was from that journal that she noticed a pattern. 3 times in 6 months, locals had reported seeing a pack of strays near the abandoned rail yard north of town. In that pack of strays, one large shepherd consistently took the lead. "He's not like the others," one witness said. "He doesn't bark, he just watches. Calm, like he's thinking." Evelyn stopped breathing. She printed out a map of the train yard, marked all the paths in and out, bought mini infrared trail cameras and planted them across the area. Then came the nights of fog, hours spent watching grainy footage, hoping. Every time a shadow moved, she held her breath in anticipation. Until one night, it happened. A German shepherd stepped into the frame. Despite his thinness, the German shepherd exuded pride. His back is straight, and his eyes, oh, those eyes. He looked right into the lens. Evelyn's heart sank to the ground. It was him. That look from 2 years ago, in the rain, when he was taken from Still There. She collapsed back into her chair, hands trembling uncontrollably. Tears streamed down her face. Ranger was alive. He had survived. He was still waiting. Evelyn pressed her palm to the computer screen, whispering through the tears, "I'm coming, Ranger. Even if I have to crawl on my knees across the whole world, I'm bringing you home." That morning, the sky was unusually clear, as if time itself had paused to prepare for something that would forever alter Evelyn's life. She wore her old moss-green sweater and held a foil-wrapped tin of cookies, a small gift meant for the nurse she'd grown fond of at the chemotherapy center. Today was the last session of her treatment plan, but there was no relief in her chest. Inside her, the emptiness still avoided was only something Ranger could fill. Evelyn's old pickup rolled slowly down the main road into town. At the 5th intersection, where 4 cracked roads crossed like a wounded cross in the heart of Maple Glen, The light turned yellow. She eased off the gas, her hand resting idly on the wheel, eyes drifting to nowhere. Then suddenly, a flash of movement in the lower right corner of the windshield darted straight into the intersection. Evelyn slammed the brakes. Other cars stopped short, too. Horns blared, but even that sound was eclipsed by something else. The eyes. Those eyes carried the memory of a rainy night 2 years ago. Evelyn's mouth fell open. The dog stood frozen in the middle of the road. The dog had matted fur and had torn its right ear, but the amber eyes brushed with those hadn't changed. Ranger? There was no doubt. Despite being leaner, dirtier, and older, it was undeniably Ranger. She was now the focus of the same gaze that had once found her in a crowd. Only now it was Evelyn screaming inside, while Ranger stood as still as stone. She threw open the door and bolted into the street. "Ranger, it's me! Ranger, come back!" People yelled from the sidewalks. Horns wailed. A bus driver shouted, "Lady, what the hell are you doing?" But Evelyn heard none of it. The world had collapsed into 2 souls, a withered woman with wind-torn hair and a dog frozen in place like a ghost from a former life. Ranger flinched. His ears twitched. His eyes never left her. Then, slowly, he took 1 step back. A low growl rumbled not from hostility, but the reflex of a creature who'd learned that safety was a lie. "It's okay, Ranger. It's me, Evelyn. I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to bring you home." Cold wind swept through the crossroads, carrying the smell of exhaust and dust. Ranger blinked. His hind legs tensed slightly. Evelyn didn't move closer. She just held out her hand the way she used to when calling him in the old days, palm open, tilted forward, gentle. No one spoke, but it felt like the whole street was holding its breath. A young woman at the nearby bus stop silently pulled out her phone and started recording. Not to share, but because she felt like she was witnessing something sacred. A reunion beyond words. Ranger took 1 step forward. Then an ear-piercing truck horn blared from the left. Ranger jolted, turned, and vanished like racing past a rusted iron fence, disappearing into a vacant lot tangled with weeds and trash. "No, Ranger, stop!" Evelyn cried out, chasing after him. However, Ranger was no longer there. She collapsed on the sidewalk, clutching her jeans, her breath shattered, tears rolling uncontrollably down her cheeks. A man approached and handed her a bottle of water. "Did you know that dog?" Evelyn nodded. She couldn't speak. She just stared toward where Ranger had vanished, as if sheer will could summon him back. Later, she returned to her truck. The cookie tin still sat on the passenger seat. She placed her hand gently on its lid and whispered, "Ranger saw me. He remembers." Inside her, emotions swelled like a flood. Joy, heartbreak, a flicker of fire that wouldn't go out. Ranger was alive, and he still recognized her, but he had learned to fear the world that once tore him from her arms. That night, Evelyn didn't sleep. She reprinted the flyers this time with bolder letters. "Ranger spotted near intersection number 5 if seen, please call." She posted them everywhere, every lamppost, every auto shop. She wouldn't let a second chance slip away. From that day on, morning and evening, Evelyn sat on a small wooden chair near that intersection. Beside her, a canvas bag with cookies, a water bottle, and Ranger's old blanket. She didn't call. She just sat, waiting. Her eyes fixed on the rusty fence where he'd disappeared. And then, after 3 days, on a foggy morning, a dark shape emerged from behind the bushes. It didn't move closer. It didn't leave. It just stood there, watching. It was Ranger. Evelyn smiled, saying nothing. She opened the cookie tin, placed it gently on the ground, and stepped back. Ranger didn't move, but his ears tilted toward the faint crinkle of foil. The reunion had begun. Not every encounter is fate, but sometimes a fleeting moment can lead someone back to what they thought was lost forever. After that brief collision at the intersection, Evelyn knew one thing for sure. Ranger was still alive, and he was close. The next morning, instead of heading straight to the hospital, Evelyn stopped at a tiny convenience store near the edge of town. She printed 10 more flyers with Ranger's photo and circled the words "Seen near intersection 5" in red marker. On the way back, she stopped at every bus stop, every telephone pole, and every coffee shop bulletin board, taping the flyers up with a fragile kind of hope, the kind that breathes only when no one is watching. She started asking questions. She spoke to delivery drivers, local vets, garbage collectors. Every answer that sounded like, "I'm not sure," or "I think I saw a shepherd near," got scribbled down in an old leather notebook. Each entry was a flicker in the dark. One late afternoon, while Evelyn sat on the back steps of the old bakery, a man with a scruffy gray beard approached. His clothes were worn, his walk firm. A weathered backpack clung to his shoulder, a crushed water canister dangling from one strap. "You're the one posting those dog flyers?" he asked. His voice was rough, maybe from too much smoke or too many cold nights. Evelyn looked up, cautious but not cold. "Yeah. Do you know something?" He gave a slow nod, then sat beside her without asking. "Name's Bobby. I served in Kandahar back in 2007. I know the eyes of a dog that's seen too much. The way it moves, the way it pauses like it's watching over the weaker ones." Evelyn stopped breathing. Bobby pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from his coat, marked with a shaky map of an area near the old train tracks. "Saw him 3 days ago, not alone. He was leading a few others. There was a small one, limping." Her voice trembled. "Are you sure it was a shepherd?" "Couldn't mistake it," Bobby said. "Upright ears, careful stride, eyes that watched every move like he was weighing your soul." He looked at me, then just walked away. No bark, no growl, just gone. Evelyn pulled a worn photo from her wallet. "Was it him? That's my Ranger." Bobby squinted. Then he nodded, firm and sure. "That's him. But he's wild now. Don't expect him to come running into your arms." Evelyn gave a sad smile. "I don't need him to run. I just need to know he's still breathing." There was a long pause. Bobby stared at her, then slowly pulled something from his backpack, a tattered old collar made of green nylon. "I didn't take it. Found it in a trash bin near the tracks. Don't know if it's his." Evelyn held it gently. No tag. No name. But the scent of earth, wind, and something that felt like hope still clinging to life hit her like a wave. "Thank you, Bobby. You just gave me one more reason not to give up." As she walked away, Bobby called after her. "If you're going to find him, do it quietly. Don't shout. Dogs like that, they listen to your heart. Don't scare them off." That night, Evelyn returned to the place Bobby had marked. She didn't bring much. Just a red flashlight, a small bundle of food, and the collar. Each step stirred old memories, Ranger's paws padding on the wooden floor, his soft breathing beside her bed, the way he'd press his warm nose into her palm during panic attacks. The wind moaned through the rusted train cars, carrying the sound of broken memories. Evelyn sat on a flat stone, laid the food gently on a bed of fallen leaves, and placed the collar beside it. She didn't call. She just stepped back into the dark and waited. No footsteps, no shadows. But the air smelled different that night. It smelled like quiet faith, like something was making its way home. Dawn washed Maple Glen in a pale silver mist. Evelyn sat behind the wheel, eyes fixed on the tree line Bobby had circled on her map. Her backpack rested on the passenger seat, filled with everything she might need: dry food, gloves, a notebook, binoculars, and Ranger's old blanket. But more important than anything inside that bag was what she carried inside her chest: the quiet readiness for possibly seeing Ranger for the first time in 2 years, or not being recognized at all. The abandoned lot sat just beyond the rusting train tracks, buried between reeds and dented shipping containers. Evelyn was stunned by the sight. It was a place the world had forgotten: mounds of decomposing waste blending into wet earth, rusted beer cans, torn cloth, and dog prints scattered like fading echoes. She moved slowly, each step deliberate, careful not to make a sound. A single bark cracked the stillness from somewhere up ahead, short, low, not aggressive but sharp, like a warning. Evelyn ducked low, raised her binoculars, and scanned the space. Between 2 gutted trailers, 3 dogs hovered in the shadows. One stood apart from the others. Ranger. Thinner. Fur tangled and rough. A faint scar was carved across his right shoulder. His body was held with a certain posture, his head tilted, ears perked high, and eyes scanning the area like a sentry. That was unmistakably him. Unmistakably him. Evelyn clutched her chest, trying not to gasp. She sat down slowly, pulled out a soft biscuit, and placed it on a piece of cloth that still carried the scent of their old home. Then she backed away. No calls, no sounds. There was only silence, as Bobby had previously informed her. Dogs like that don't listen to words, they hear hearts. Minutes passed. 15, maybe more. A smaller dog crept toward the food, but Ranger stepped forward and blocked it, his body calm but firm. Evelyn watched, and every movement reawakened something in her memory. Ranger paused, sniffed, and then glanced to his left. He used to do that every time he checked the room during Evelyn's panic attacks. He was still in there. Ranger hadn't disappeared. He'd just become the guardian of a new pack. Evelyn stood up, maintaining distance. "Ranger," she called gently. Her voice was shaky, low, barely a whisper against the breeze. Ranger spun around, his amber eyes locked with hers, and for a moment the world stopped moving. But there was no wagging tail, no joyful sparkle. There was only a guarded stillness. He stepped forward, not toward her, but to shield the smaller dogs behind him. His stance was defensive. He was prepared to defend, not to reunite. "Ranger, it's me," she murmured. "It's Evelyn. Remember?" No answer. The wind carried the scent of rot and rust, but Evelyn smelled only sorrow. Her vision blurred. She dropped to her knees, palms flat on the earth, trying to show she meant no harm. "I missed you, Ranger. I've been looking for you every single day. I just want to take you home." Ranger took one more step. A low rumble vibrated from his throat. Not a threat, just warning. "I understand," Evelyn said, swallowing her pain. "You have your pack now. You're not the boy who used to rest his head on my lap every night." She bowed her head. Tears fell quietly onto the damp leaves. "If you're alive, that's all I needed to know." Silence. Then, a soft shuffle. Evelyn lifted her head. Ranger was staring at her. The tension in his body had eased slightly. His ears were no longer stiff. In that moment, he slowly blinked and tilted his head in a way that felt familiar. A signal. A memory. "Ranger?" she whispered, her heart stalling in her chest. He didn't move, but he didn't retreat either. Ranger sat down. He didn't take a seat in front of his pack. Instead, he positioned himself to face her. It was a fragile thread, but real. Evelyn didn't push forward. She sat back, eyes quietly locked on him across the space. The wind whistled through the brittle trees, rattling soda cans buried in the trash. She pulled out Ranger's old blanket and spread it gently on the ground beneath her, like a message. "I'll wait. You don't have to come to me. Just don't turn away." Time passed, like water dripping through a crack. The younger dogs lost interest and curled up beneath a container. Ranger remained seated, watching her. Occasionally he tilted his head. Occasionally his nose lifted to catch the scent of the air. Finally, with a breath so small it almost disappeared, Evelyn pulled a tiny cloth from her bag. She took out an old handkerchief from her bag. It was the old handkerchief that Ranger used to rest his head on at home. She placed it at the edge of the blanket, then backed away a few steps. Ranger watched. Then, cautiously, step by step, like a soldier sweeping for landmines, he moved forward. One step. Pause. Another. Until he reached the handkerchief. He sniffed it deeply, and a sound rose from his throat, not a growl, not a bark, but a long, quiet breath, like something inside him had just found shape again. Evelyn bit her lip. Her tears returned. Ranger didn't look back at her. But he didn't return to the others either. Instead, he sat down right beside the cloth. His tail gave one slow, gentle tap on the dirt, then stilled. That was all. And for Evelyn, that was enough. For the first time in 2 years, she allowed herself to hope, not as a desperate act, but as something real. I hope that worked. Hope that's remembered. I hope that might finally come home. Evelyn didn't return the next day. She understood that trust, especially in a soul that's been betrayed, was not rebuilt with calls or commands, but with patience. For 3 days, she kept the same rhythm, same place, same time. She sat quietly just outside the landfill perimeter, left a small meal and a familiar scented object, then walked away. At first, nothing changed. Ranger didn't appear. The younger dogs sometimes came, ate quickly, then vanished. But Evelyn didn't falter. She tracked every detail in her notebook, each scribble the careful work of someone observing a battlefield with love instead of fear. Then, on the 4th day, Ranger appeared. He didn't approach, just stood high on a grassy ridge, watching as she placed the food down. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He just stood there long enough for Evelyn to know he'd come to look. On the 6th day, Ranger stepped up to eat moments after Evelyn had left. On the 8th, he sniffed her blanket for a long time. And on the 10th day, Ranger lay down next to an old shirt she'd left behind, the very one that once covered both of them on a powerless winter night, long ago. Evelyn couldn't stop the tears when she watched the infrared footage later that evening. Ranger still remembered. Ranger was still feeling. She began bringing more relics from their past. The metal bowl he used to eat from. The collar he once wore. The frayed duck plush that had been his first toy. She placed each item down with quiet reverence, like she was placing a hand over the heart of an old memory, careful not to bruise it. One misty morning, Evelyn arrived earlier than usual. She stopped in her tracks the moment she turned down the dirt path into the clearing. Ranger was already there, but he wasn't alone. Walking beside him was a tiny pup with honey-brown fur and a slight limp in its back leg. Evelyn held her breath. Ranger had brought a child? The 2 dogs moved slowly toward the food pile. Ranger scanned the area first. The little pup rushed forward to the metal bowl, tail flicking with joy, tongue darting to the edges. Ranger didn't eat. He just lay down nearby, his eyes fixed on Evelyn. She hadn't moved. Her chest ached with a strange, heavy tenderness. She'd waited so long. She'd lost so much. But she had never imagined Ranger returning as a father. And oddly, it didn't hurt. It brought her a quiet kind of peace. Ranger hadn't just survived, Ranger had led, had protected, had stepped into a new role, the same one he once held with her. Evelyn lowered herself to the ground, slowly pulled out an extra biscuit, and placed it beside the bowl. "Hey, little one," she whispered softly. "What's your name? Can I call you Finn?" Ranger tilted his head slightly. His gaze was no longer sharp with fear, but quiet with recognition. Evelyn didn't move closer, didn't reach out. She simply sat and watched. Finn finished eating, then nudged Ranger's nose playfully. Ranger leaned in and gently licked the top of Finn's head. Evelyn hadn't seen that kind of tenderness in him since before they were torn apart. That night, she wrote in her journal, "Ranger has a child. I don't know if Finn is his by blood, but Ranger treats him like he is with care, patience, and the protectiveness of a real father. I'm no longer the center of Ranger's world, and strangely, that doesn't make me sad. Maybe love isn't about keeping something close. Maybe it's about watching someone you love grow, protect, and learn to love something new. Ranger is learning to love again, and in doing that, maybe he's healing his old wounds by walking this new path with Finn." From that day on, Ranger and Finn returned daily. Evelyn never pushed. She just talked. She told stories about the cabin in the woods, about the nights with fireworks when Ranger would hide under the bed, about how he used to tug her sleeve every time he sensed a panic attack coming on. Finn began wagging his tail whenever Evelyn spoke. Once, the pup even crept close enough to sniff her jacket sleeve before scampering back to Ranger. Evelyn couldn't hold back her smile. Slowly, the distance shrank. Ranger stopped lying on the far edges. He began resting beside her scent, even when she was nearby. One day he lay right on her old shirt, not moving even though she stood only a few feet away. Evelyn didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just sat on the ground across from them. Just one woman, one protector, and one soul born in harshness, now learning the shape of love. In that moment, Evelyn understood. Love doesn't need to stay the same to still be love. Ranger wasn't the boy who curled up on her feet every night anymore, but he was still hers. And now, Ranger had brought someone new into that bond. A small life named Finn, opening a chapter Evelyn never expected. From the deepest place in her chest, she whispered, "Thank you, Ranger. Thank you for still being you, in your own new way." That morning, the sky was covered with thick, ash-colored clouds. The wind swept in from the mountains, carrying the damp scent of soil and the crackle of static in the air, nature's quiet warning. Evelyn stood on the porch of her wooden cabin, eyes fixed on the horizon, where dark coils of storm clouds had begun to gather. The weather forecast had issued a warning. A massive storm would strike, expected to last 3 days and sweep across the entire forest region. Her brow furrowed. The landfill where Ranger and Finn had taken shelter lay beside a narrow creek, already swollen from recent rains. Evelyn knew just a few more hours of heavy rainfall, and that creek would become a violent torrent. And Ranger, no matter how intelligent, wouldn't be able to protect his little pack alone. By midday, the rain had begun to fall. At first it came in light drops, then it thickened into heavy sheets, slamming against the windows like fists. Evelyn zipped up her raincoat, grabbed the waterproof flashlight, a first aid kit, dry towels, and some food. Her heart was screaming with fear, but her voice was steady as she spoke to herself. "I can't sit here while Ranger and Finn are out there. I have to go." Before she left, she scribbled a quick note and stuck it to the kitchen door. "If I don't come back, Ranger is downstream of the Hoarfrost Creek." The road to the landfill was slick and nearly invisible in the downpour. The mud threatened to engulf the tires completely. Evelyn parked half a kilometer away, where the ground was firm enough to hold. The rest of the way, she trudged on foot, her boots sinking into the sludge. When she reached the area, she called softly once, "Ranger? Finn?" No response. But through the roar of rain, she heard it. A sharp bark, then a long, anxious howl. She raced toward the low ground near the stream, where the dogs usually huddled under old scraps of corrugated metal. In the hazy light, she saw two soaked figures. Finn was stuck between collapsed wooden planks, one leg caught in a gap of twisted metal. Ranger was barking frantically, circling, trying to pull Finn out without hurting him. "I'm here!" Evelyn yelled, scrambling down into the rising stream. Each step dragged her deeper into the muck. The cold bit into her skin. But she didn't stop. She dropped to her knees beside them, pried away the rotting boards. Finn whimpered, soaked to the bone, his wide eyes full of terror. It's okay, little one. Let me help." She had just lifted Finn free when a wave of dizziness hit her. Her vision blurred. Her right hand went numb. A violent seizure gripped her. She barely had time to glance at Ranger and whisper, "Don't let me drown!" Before collapsing, her body half submerged in the rising flood. In that instant, Ranger howled a long, soul-tearing cry and sprang into action. He gently bit down on the collar of her coat, pulling her from the rushing water. No leash, no commands. But Ranger knew what to do. He dragged her across the mud, past the debris, and up to higher ground. Finn limped after them, trembling but close behind. Under the pounding rain, Ranger positioned himself across Evelyn's chest, using his body to keep her warm, to monitor her breathing. He had been trained to detect seizures, and Ranger remembered. He pressed down on her chest in familiar rhythms, actions once drilled into him like survival reflexes. Not far away, a bolt of lightning struck a dead tree. The ground shuddered. Ranger didn't move. He stayed there, motionless and alert, guarding her as she fought through the storm inside her body. 10 minutes. 20. Evelyn began to breathe again. Her eyelids fluttered open, blurry with rain. The first thing she saw was a pair of amber eyes, just inches from hers. "Ranger," she whispered, lifting her hand to gently touch his cheek. For the first time in 2 years, Ranger didn't back away. Instead, he leaned forward and pressed his nose to her forehead. Evelyn cried, not from pain, not from fear. But she knew in that moment that Ranger had chosen her. She knew that Ranger had chosen her not out of instinct. Instead, he had chosen her with his heart. When she regained full consciousness, the rain had softened into a steady drizzle. Finn was curled up beside her, his head resting on her thigh. Ranger hadn't moved. His eyes stayed locked on hers, steady and sure. "Thank you," Evelyn murmured. "Thank you for not leaving me when I needed you most. This time it's my turn to bring you both home." Though the storm still howled in the valley, Evelyn sat against the base of a tree, her body trembling, still recovering from the seizure. Finn had fallen asleep, nose tucked close to her side, clinging to the warmth of the person he was beginning to trust. Ranger kept his distance, proud, watchful. But his eyes had changed. His eyes were no longer guarded. Now, they were calm. Evelyn tilted her head toward him. Even exhausted, her lips pulled into a soft smile. In Ranger's mind, old memories stirred. He remembered Evelyn collapsing at the train station years ago. The sound of sirens filled the air. The crowd was filled with panic. The glow of red light through the glass ceiling. Ranger, fresh out of service dog training, had thrown his weight on her chest, keeping her conscious until help arrived. No one had taught him love. But love had taught him loyalty. And now, in a flooded forest, beneath a sky heavy with storm, Ranger had chosen to act again, not from training, but from something deeper. He rested his head on Evelyn's thigh and exhaled gently. Evelyn reached out with a trembling hand and stroked his soaked back. "You're still my Ranger," she whispered, "but stronger now, braver. I don't need the Ranger from 2 years ago. I love the Ranger you are today." In that stillness, as the wind rustled the battered trees, something deep within them began to heal, not with medicine or words, but with presence. Ranger hadn't just saved her. He had chosen her again. His instinct to protect, once shaped by training, had come back to life, not as a reaction, but as a conscious choice. Ranger had returned. But he wasn't the same. He was wiser now, strong enough to guard, patient enough to wait, and brave enough to forgive. The harsh white light from the ceiling blurred Evelyn's vision as she opened her eyes for the first time. In those first few seconds, surrounded by the beep of machines and the sharp scent of antiseptic, Evelyn didn't understand why she was still alive until she felt a soft ache in her shoulder. This was the exact spot where Ranger had rested his head during the storm. Fragments of memory surged back. The rushing water, that desperate, sorrowful howl, and the warmth of fur pressed to her chest in the middle of the flood. And just like that, she knew. If her eyes were still open, it meant she still had one promise left to keep. The sterile hospital scent, the steady rhythm of the heart monitor, the weight of the blanket across her chest. They all told her one thing: she was safe. For now, Dr. Winters, an old friend and the one who had stood by her throughout her treatment, sat quietly by her bedside, holding a chart. Her eyes were tired behind her glasses but softened as Evelyn stirred. "Welcome back," she said gently. Evelyn blinked, then rasped out, "Ranger, Finn, where are they?" "They're okay," Winters replied. "We found all 3 of you because of the note you left. The police and rescue team got there just in time. Ranger is at the veterinary wing, recovering from exhaustion and some minor injuries. Finn caught a cold, but he's safe and under care too." Evelyn exhaled. Her chest hurt with every breath, but not from pain, from relief. That peace, however, lasted only a moment. Winters placed his hand on hers and spoke slowly, as if each word was a stitch in her skin. "Evelyn, the latest scans show that the tumor has spread. It's stage 4. We can keep you comfortable for a few more weeks. A month, maybe. But time is running short." Evelyn didn't cry. Her eyes remained dry. She had known this truth for some time. It was just now signed and sealed by someone else. After a long pause, she asked, "Can I see Ranger?" Winters nodded. "I'll bring him in after the nurse checks your vitals. But Evelyn, I have to ask, what do you want for the time you have left?" Evelyn didn't answer right away. She turned toward the window, where the pale autumn sun filtered through the yellowing leaves. A beam of light touched her cheek, softening the lines of her thin, worn face. "I'm not dying," she said quietly, eyes still on the fading gold beyond the glass. "At least not yet. I won't die, until Ranger and Finn have a home." Winters didn't reply. She simply tightened her grip on Evelyn's hand, silently conveying her agreement. That afternoon, they brought Ranger in. He walked slowly, eyes scanning the tubes and unfamiliar smells in the room. But when he saw Evelyn, his gaze lit up. He patted over, resting his chin gently on the edge of the bed. No bark, no sound. Just quiet recognition. "Come here," Evelyn whispered. Ranger climbed softly onto the bed, curled up beside her like he used to in the old days. Evelyn placed her hand on his back and murmured, "I know you remember. But you need to know I won't be here much longer." Ranger closed his eyes and leaned in closer, his warm breath seeping through the thin hospital gown. With Winter's help, Evelyn began writing what she called their future file. Evelyn did not intend this document to be a will, a guide, a record of every little detail. When Ranger liked to eat, how he hated vacuum cleaners, how fireworks made him shake, and the way rubbing his ears calmed him. For Finn, she wrote, he likes sleeping on soft towels. He has a tiny orange ink mark on his back left paw. And he really loves story time at 5 p.m. She submitted a placement request to the same veteran support center that had once trained Ranger, asking them to consider taking him back and to assess Finn for a possible future in therapy work. Every day after that, Ranger was allowed to visit. Finn, too, was bundled up in his favorite towel. Nurses started recognizing their footsteps in the hallway. Some paused outside the door just to glimpse the quiet companionship inside. One morning, Evelyn was too worn out to speak, but she still pointed at Ranger and made a slow hand gesture, a silent goodbye, just in case. Winters sat beside her and whispered, "We're ready." A recently recovered veteran has agreed to meet Ranger next week. He lives on a farm near the Ozarks. He sustained a leg injury during combat. Very gentle. If Ranger agrees, we'll try the match. Evelyn nodded and closed her eyes, but a faint smile curled on her lips. Good. Then I'll hold on, at least until then. That evening, when the pale sunset poured through the white curtains, Evelyn asked to sit up. With help from the nurses and a small dose of painkillers, she rose slowly and walked to the window. There, she laid out 3 photos. One of Ranger in uniform, proud and upright. One photo showed Finn dozing off, his head resting on her shoulder. And one of the last photos showed both of them, just beyond the forest's edge, looking straight into the lens. Their eyes conveyed a clear message. We remain hopeful. Evelyn held up that last picture and whispered, I won't let you get lost again. That night, she asked to record a message for whoever would be the next person to walk beside Ranger and Finn. Her voice was faint, but steady. If you're hearing this, it means I'm no longer here, but please know this. Ranger isn't just a dog. He's a soldier, a friend. He is the most treasured memory I have ever had. And Finn is a second chance. Innocent, curious. They are easy to love. Please don't love them out of duty. Love them because your heart knows they're worth it. When the nurse stopped the recording, Evelyn leaned back into her pillow, eyes gazing at the ceiling. I want that message delivered to the chosen one, she said, not buried in some file or archive. Winters nodded silently. The next day, a group of high school students visited the hospital to deliver charity gifts. One boy was invited into Evelyn's room by a nurse. When he saw Ranger and Finn lying side by side near the bed, his eyes lit up. Are you the one who trained them? He asked, unsure but sincere. Evelyn smiled. No, I was just lucky enough to walk a little while with them. After the boy left, the nurse teased gently, so if someone asked what you are to Ranger, what would you say? Evelyn looked over at the sleeping dog, his breath slow and even. I'm his old home, she said softly, but the kind of home Ranger always knows how to find again. Outside, it was autumn. However, within Evelyn, it was a season of ultimate transition, a silent moment where one must relinquish the things they hold dearest. It was a time not filled with tears, but filled with hope. At dawn, golden light filtered through the frosted hospital window. Evelyn hadn't slept. In her mind was the image of someone she had never met but hoped would become Ranger's future. Logan Reese. His file was thin, but every line felt like a battlefield scar. He was 36 years old. Former Marine. He had lost his left leg to a landmine in Kandahar, where Evelyn had previously served. Now he lived alone on a farm in southern Missouri. In the box asking why he wanted to adopt a therapy dog, he had written just one sentence. "I don't need someone to save me. I need someone to live beside me." Evelyn knew. Whoever wrote that wasn't broken. He was someone who had walked through loneliness and still stood. That Saturday morning, the nursing ward felt unusually still. Ranger rested his chin on the edge of the bed, eyes half closed. Finn was curled up near Evelyn's feet. She wore a beige turtleneck sweater, her thinning hair loose over her shoulders, her hands folded gently as if holding time itself. There was a gentle tap on the door. The nurse stepped in, letting in a tall man on crutches. Logan's eyes were dark, his brows slightly lowered as if carrying a quiet sorrow, but in that gaze lived something unmistakable: sincerity. Evelyn smiled. "You must be Logan." He nodded. "And you're Evelyn, the one Ranger pulled from the flood?" "Not exactly," she said with a small smile. "I'm the one Ranger pulled out of herself." Logan stepped forward, not rushing, but with a certain resolve in his gait. Evelyn gestured. "Have a seat. Ranger decides for himself." Ranger stretched, then stepped down from the bed. No bark. He took slow, cautious steps towards Logan. Towards Logan. Logan didn't reach out quickly like so many others. He sat fully, resting his open hand on his knee, eyes steady, no pressure. Ranger stopped about a foot away, sniffed once, twice. He then stepped closer to Logan. He gently pressed his nose into Logan's palm. He inhaled deeply, and gently touched his forehead to Logan's the same way he used to do with Evelyn on nights when sleep wouldn't come. Finn looked up, watching, curious. When he saw Ranger stay, Finn crept forward and stood beside him. Winters whispered behind them. 2 minutes. Including Finn. "I've never seen that." Logan said quietly, "I don't know if I deserve them, but if he'll have me, I'll learn to be someone who does." Evelyn looked from Ranger to Logan. "You don't have to deserve it all at once. Just be honest, be patient. Ranger doesn't need perfect. He needs kindness." Logan lowered his head. "I had an older brother. He was not part of a rescue operation. He passed away during one. A rescue op. Since then, I haven't kept anything. Not a single plant has been kept, not even one. I was too afraid I couldn't hold on. But maybe it's time to try again." Evelyn said nothing more. But in her eyes was a quiet agreement. Ranger returned to her side but didn't lie down. He sat by her bed, watching Logan. Evelyn placed her hand gently on Ranger's head, as if sending a final message. "If you trust him, so do I." Then she turned to Winters and whispered, "Schedule the trial session. But tell him, this isn't a test. It's a chance for both of them." The next day, Logan returned with a trainer from the VA. Ranger didn't need a leash. He walked beside Logan as if he'd done it forever. Finn bounded behind them, tugging at Logan's shoelace. The nurse standing beside Evelyn smiled and whispered, "You don't need a will anymore. You have completely surrendered your heart." And just like that, something began to shift quietly, but without question. That afternoon, after Logan had left, Evelyn asked Winters to pull up Logan's farm on the tablet. She wanted to see the place Ranger and Finn might call home. The pictures Logan had sent filled the screen. There was a white fence in the background, a wide old maple tree casting long shadows, a hammock strung between 2 oak trunks. Evelyn touched the screen gently, eyes distant. Ranger will have space to run. Finn will have shade to grow in. Perhaps Logan will finally experience the joy of waiting for someone. Winters said nothing, then smiled softly. "You know, I thought at first you wouldn't let anyone in. I was wrong." Evelyn turned to her friend and took her hand. Not everyone deserves a second chance, but those who know how to hold a second chance do deserve it. Outside the window, sunlight flooded the floor, casting the shadows of 3 figures. An aging soldier preparing to let go, a younger soldier stepping forward, and a dog in between, binding the 2 worlds together, with a choice made in silence, but from the heart. She never expected the last time she heard that name would be in a lawsuit. The message from the court clerk arrived at the hospital, and the air in the room turned heavy, as if winter had arrived early. Derek, the man who once abandoned Ranger in a storm, had returned, armed with a lawyer, falsified documents, and one clear goal: to reclaim Ranger, like property. He filed a petition for emergency transfer of animal guardianship, Dr. Winters said, setting the printed document on the table. Claiming you're no longer legally capable of caring for a dog, he submitted a purchase agreement, vaccine records, and even an old vet bill. Evelyn clenched the blanket edge in her fists, her tired eyes lit with fury. That's not happening. Not while I'm still breathing. Winters hesitated. Evelyn, you've just had another round of pain meds. Your body can't handle major stress. Evelyn lifted her head. Then let me carry it. But Ranger's not going back to the man who threw him away. Derek arrived Monday morning. He walked in without asking, a young lawyer by his side, slick hair, iPad in hand. Ranger growled low from the corner of the room. Finn hid beneath the bed. Evelyn met Derek's gaze. Hello, Derek. I believe it was raining the last time we met. Derek smirked. I'm here to take back what was mine. Ranger was never yours, and he certainly isn't now. The lawyer started to speak, holding out paperwork, but before he could say a word, another voice broke the silence. We request an immediate in-room hearing. It was the VA representative, standing beside Officer Wilson. They'd arrived early. Now they stood like silent sentinels beside Evelyn's bed. The court granted approval for an emergency hearing, right there in Evelyn's hospital room, on humanitarian grounds. Before it began, Evelyn asked the nurse to find Ranger's old service tag, the one that read, Maximilian PTSD Unit a 02. She fastened it around Ranger's neck, buckling it tight. If today is a fight, let Ranger wear what proves he's always been a protector. Ranger stood tall. No retraining needed. He understood. The hearing took place that afternoon. Everyone was present. Evelyn lay on her side, pale but focused. Derek stood 3 meters away, attempting to appear confident, but he looked more like a bystander in an unfamiliar story. His lawyer laid out the case, documents and a claim of legal ownership. Ms. Evelyn is no longer fit for guardianship. Legally, a dog is property. The VA's lawyer countered, Ranger is a certified PTSD service dog. He is not a possession, and more importantly, Ranger can speak through his actions. They turned to Evelyn. She nodded, her voice faint but clear. Ask Ranger. The lawyer stepped forward, motioning between the 2 sides. Ranger. Who do you choose? Ranger lifted his head. Silence. No one moved. No one breathed. Derek whistled. Max, come here. Ranger didn't flinch. Evelyn didn't look at Derek. She placed her hand gently at the edge of the bed and whispered, Ranger. That was all it took. Ranger walked slowly across the room, not rushing, not afraid. He rested his head on Evelyn's leg. Then lie down. No one said another word. Out in the hallway, nurses and hospital staff watched through the glass. One of them had once seen Ranger push open the ER doors to call for help when Evelyn collapsed. A young nurse whispered, I thought things like that only happened in movies. But now I believe some dogs aren't pets. They're living proof that love remembers. The judge's representative announced, Petition denied. Care will transfer according to the will and the guardianship plan already on file. After the hearing, Derek lingered at the door for a moment. No one walked him out. No one looked his way. Evelyn turned to Wilson, breath shallow. "Take Ranger outside for a bit. Let him feel the air." Ranger resisted, but Evelyn stroked his back. "I'm okay. Ranger needs to breathe." Winters took her hand. "You just did something no one thought a dying woman could do." Evelyn smiled softly. "Not because I'm strong, but because I owed him one last fight." Winters nodded, "And I think today, Ranger paid that debt back." That night, after the lights dimmed in the hospital, Evelyn asked for the window to be opened. The moon was high. Cold wind swept through the curtains. Ranger lay by her bed, chin on a thin blanket. Finn curled up on the pillow beside her. Evelyn looked at the two of them and whispered the same words she'd once written in her letter. "Please love them not out of duty, but because your heart knows they're worth it." She lifted her hand and removed the old tag from Ranger's neck. She gently placed it on her chest. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "Ranger starts a new journey. But tonight, Ranger is still mine." Out in the hallway, Logan stood holding a letter Evelyn had written just for him. A nurse approached and handed him a small black recorder. "She wanted you to hear her voice after she's gone," she said. Logan nodded, clutching both in his hands, as if holding a promise made without words. Inside the room, Evelyn closed her eyes. Evelyn closed her eyes, not because she was exhausted. However, she finally felt at peace. The next morning, Logan returned with a small backpack. Inside were 2 new collars, one for Ranger and one for Finn, engraved with their names and his farm address on the inside. In his other hand, he carried a bag of homemade soft walnut cookies. "Evelyn liked walnut cookies, right?" he asked the nurse. She nodded, eyes misty. "I don't know what else to do, except quietly carry out the things she left behind." Ranger sniffed the collar, then looked up at Logan. His tail gave one small wag. No noise, but enough. Ranger understood. Finn licked a crumb off the edge of the cookie, then nuzzled his head into Evelyn's old pillow. Neither of them would ever forget her warmth. But now, Evelyn's legacy didn't live inside a hospital room. It was out there, walking on 4 legs, held in 2 hearts that still beat. Once the applause subsided and the sunset gently closed the hearing, no one left the square carrying the same heart they had arrived with. But the most important part still wasn't over. The next day, a photo swept across social media. It captured the exact moment Ranger laid his head on Evelyn's hand as the court delivered its ruling. The image spread with a simple caption, "Justice served. Loyalty witnessed." Major news outlets called it the most humane courtroom moment of the year in Wyoming. Back in her hospital room, hours after the ruling, Evelyn stirred awake. Winters sat beside her, eyes rimmed with red but smiling. "You won," the doctor whispered. Evelyn turned toward the window. Ranger lay just outside the room, waiting. Finn rested peacefully in Logan's arms, calm, as if the world had finally gone quiet. "I didn't win," Evelyn said softly. "We just didn't lose anything else that mattered." That afternoon, a small documentary crew arrived at the hospital, asking to film the final chapter in Evelyn and Ranger's story. She agreed, not for glory, but to let the truth remain. Ranger stayed by her bedside the entire time, never once stepping away. In the final scene, the camera captured an unstaged and undirected moment. Evelyn slowly raised her hand and placed it on Ranger's head. Her eyes closed. Her hand no longer trembled. The camera stopped rolling just as her lips moved, the director later recalled. It looked like she said, "Thank you." No sound, but everyone heard it. Finn rested his head on Logan's lap, nestling into a small circle that resembled a tranquil shadow. And softly, Logan whispered, maybe to Evelyn, maybe to himself, "I'll get this right," with whatever part of me she believed was still good. After the applause faded and the sunset quietly closed the hearing, no one left the square with the same heart they came with. But the most important part still wasn't over. The next day, a photo began circulating across social media. Ranger rested his head on Evelyn's hand at the exact moment the judge delivered the verdict. It was captioned simply, "Justice served. Loyalty witnessed." Major media outlets called it the most humane courtroom moment of the year in Wyoming. In the hospital room, hours after the ruling, Evelyn slowly awoke. Winters sat beside her, eyes rimmed red but smiling. "You won," she whispered. Evelyn turned her gaze towards the window. Ranger was lying in the hallway, waiting. Finn rested in Logan's arms, peaceful, as if the world had finally stilled. "I didn't win," Evelyn said softly. "We just didn't lose anything else we couldn't afford to lose." That afternoon, a small documentary crew arrived, requesting to film the final chapter of Evelyn and Ranger's journey. She agreed not for glory, but to leave behind the truth. Ranger stayed pressed against her bed the entire time. In the final shot, the camera caught something no one had staged. Evelyn's hand rose gently as it rested on Ranger's head. Her eyes closed. Her hand no longer trembled. The footage stopped right as her lips moved, the director later recalled. It looked like she said, "Thank you." No sound, but everyone heard it. Finn curled up in Logan's lap, a tiny shadow folded into stillness. Logan whispered to no one in particular, "I'll get this right." With every piece of me she believed was still good. After the lights and headlines faded, after the hearing became a memory, all that remained was quiet. And in that quiet, Evelyn knew the true goodbye had finally arrived. The room glowed with the soft light of late afternoon. Evelyn leaned into her pillow, her frail frame wrapped in a white blanket. On the bedside table sat an old, weathered tin box, the only item she'd kept from her cabin in the woods. "Help me open it," she whispered to the nurse. Inside, Logan saw 3 items: an old vaccination tag, a thin scrap of cloth Ranger used to carry around as a pup, and a worn ultrasonic training whistle fastened to a faded leather cord. Evelyn picked up the whistle, then placed it in Logan's palm. "Don't use it unless he's truly afraid. It's not a command, it's a reminder. It serves as a reminder that I am present, that I'll always come back." The room fell still. Evelyn sat up slightly, eyes searching for Ranger. "Ranger, stand at attention." Ranger rose immediately, eyes focused. He didn't bark, didn't whimper. He simply stood, a soldier, moments before his final farewell. "Well done," she whispered. "Now, dismissed, but never stop protecting." Logan stood beside her, unsure whether to bow or kneel. But it was Finn, once the shyest among them, who stepped forward. He placed one paw gently on the back of Evelyn's hand. "He learns faster than I thought," Evelyn smiled, her eyes never leaving Ranger. She gripped Logan's hand, then slowly pressed Ranger's leash into his palm. No speech, no grand farewell, just one long, quiet look. "I'm not replacing you," Logan said, voice catching. "I'll just carry it forward." Evelyn nodded. Evelyn nodded, as if she were completing the most sacred ritual of her life. Before leaving, Logan paused one last time. Ranger still stood beside the bed, refusing to move. Logan knelt down, placed a hand on Ranger's neck, a silent vow. Evelyn, eyes nearly closed, whispered, "Don't let him forget me." Logan squeezed her hand. "Never." The nurse handed Logan a small cloth, the one Ranger had carried as a puppy. Evelyn had folded it neatly and placed it next to her letter. "He still likes that smell when he sleeps," she said. "Even now, he's still a little boy inside." Logan pressed the cloth to his chest, then gave Ranger a gentle hand signal. Later that evening, Logan returned to the now empty room. The scent of peppermint lingered faintly on the pillow. In the truck, he opened the letter Evelyn had left. The final lines, written in fading ink, read, "Let Ranger take you to the places I never got to go. And if one day he looks around for me, please tell him that I was there, all the way to the end." That day, the sunlight no longer spilled through the hospital window, but memory remained in her final breath, in the hand that passed the leash, and in a promise that never broke. Logan folded the letter and tucked it beside the cloth. Outside, stars began to rise. Ranger sighed and gently rested his head on Logan's lap. The next morning, Logan laid 2 new collars on the kitchen counter. One for Ranger, engraved with his name and the small word, "Retired." One for Finn, etched with "Second Chance," "First Heart." He slipped them on, one by one, then opened the front door. The early breeze rolled in, carrying the scent of wet grass and pale morning sun. Ranger stepped out first. Finn followed close behind. Logan walked after them, Evelyn's whistle still in his hand. Across the ridge behind the farmhouse, 3 figures moved slowly toward the horizon. None of them looked back. They all understood that they were moving forward for someone who was no longer able to do so. It happened on a morning with no farewells. The signs were of a kind only a heart can comprehend. Evelyn slipped quietly out of this world, like a soldier stepping softly away after her final tour. The hospital was quieter than usual. Nurses walked lighter. There were no voices in the hallway outside Evelyn's room. Everyone knew the moment was near. Evelyn hadn't woken since the day she passed over Ranger's leash. She had drifted into a deep, peaceful sleep, as if dreaming of a place filled with sunshine and soft grass, where Ranger could run freely without the burden of having to protect anyone. Ranger still stood watch at the head of the bed. He didn't eat, he didn't sleep. He simply stayed silent and still. Finn, or rather Charlie, curled up at the foot of the bed. Occasionally he whimpered softly, nudging his nose against Evelyn's hand, then curled into the pillow like he had when he was small. Logan entered the room and rested a hand gently on the old tin box still on the bedside table. Ranger lifted his head slightly, as if confirming Evelyn was still there. Logan sat down without a word. Outside the window, dawn was just beginning to break. The morning light crept in, pale and quiet, like a white sheet gently laid across a reality. Charlie pressed his head into Evelyn's chest, unwilling to be moved. When a nurse tried to lift him, he resisted, scratching lightly, growling softly. In the end, it was Logan who knelt beside him and whispered, "She's not hurting anymore, but there's still someone out there who needs you." Ranger rose slowly and stepped closer to the bed. He placed his front paws gently on the sheet, stretched forward, and touched his nose to Evelyn's forehead, a gesture he had once reserved for moments of her deepest fear. But now, there was no fear, only goodbye. Logan pulled a worn envelope from his jacket, something Dr. Winters had left for him. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single handwritten note. "Some people aren't meant to stay long in this world, only long enough to make every moment feel deeper for the ones they leave behind." And in the lower corner, one final line. "We'll take care of the ones you left behind, and you protect Evelyn in that silent way only a dog can." Ranger didn't move. His ears flicked slightly, then folded back. He walked to the doorway, turned, and looked one last time at Evelyn as if etching her into his memory forever. That evening, at a quiet memorial in the town funeral home, Logan didn't speak. He simply brought Ranger onto the stage. No leash, no instructions, just silence. Ranger walked to the large photograph at the center. Evelyn was smiling with her arms wrapped around him during his younger days. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he stepped beneath the frame, lay down, and rested his head on the wooden floor. The room stayed still. A little girl leaned toward her mother and whispered, "The dog remembers. He's keeping his promise." From that day forward, people in town began calling Ranger by a new name. Not official, but understood. The Memory Keeper. A week later, Logan took Ranger and Finn back up the hill behind the farmhouse, the place Evelyn had once sat and watched the sunset. He walked slowly. Every step carried memory. His hand no longer trembled as it held Ranger's leash, but the warmth was the same as the day Evelyn placed it there. At the top, Logan stopped. The grass had grown back. A breeze moved through the pines, whispering something sacred. He set a small stone bench in the earth. Etched into it were the words, "In memory of Evelyn Carter, she never walked alone." Each letter carved with the careful hand of someone who meant every word. Beside the bench, a low stone pillar bore a weathered plaque that caught the evening sun. K9 Unit PTSD. Veteran, Maximilian Ranger. Always faithful. Logan spread an old blanket beneath the pines. Finn curled beside the bench, still and quiet, as if standing guard. Ranger lay down beside him, resting his head where Evelyn used to sit. From his coat pocket, Logan took out Evelyn's notebook. Each page marked a piece of their journey. The first time Ranger was alerted to a panic attack. The day Finn licked her hand as she awoke from a seizure was particularly memorable. On the last page, just a single line. "If you're reading this, it means Ranger trusted you. Trust him back. And continue." Logan closed the notebook, kissed the cover, and placed it on the stone bench. He didn't pray. He didn't need to. Every sacred thing had already been lived. As the sun dipped behind the pines, the three of them walked down the hill. None of them looked back, but in the soft grass, their footprints overlapped as if Evelyn still walked with them, quiet, steady, never lost. The old tin box, still holding the cloth, the whistle, and the training tag, was placed at the base of the memorial. Logan knelt, buried it gently in the earth, and pressed both palms into the soil, as if sending one last message. "Thank you for believing in me." They remained steadfast in their devotion to Ranger. They never let go of themselves. Before leaving, he took the whistle from his collar and placed it atop the stone. He knew he'd never blow it. Ranger didn't need calling anymore. He had stayed. They stood exactly where Evelyn had last stood. As they descended the hill, Logan glanced at Ranger, no longer a hospital sentinel, but something more. Ranger had become a living embodiment of Evelyn's legacy. Finn, who was still young, already carried his father's steady gaze. Under a sky bathed in gold, they didn't say a word. Every footstep carried Evelyn's breath forward, their paths intertwined in the grass behind them like memories sewn into motion. Logan walked slowly, letting Ranger lead. Finn looked up every so often, as if asking, "Are we going the right way?" Logan placed his hand on Finn's back. "Yes, we're walking forward, for her." No one cried. But there was something warm and tight and wordless in the wind, a blessing without a voice. In the distance, birds flew in pairs over the ridge as if someone was still showing them the way. And in the hush between the leaves, a voice seemed to stir through the trees, soft and certain. "I never left. I'm just a little ahead. And Ranger, you know the way now, don't you? No farewell was ever spoken, yet everything unspoken had already been said in the steady, sacred steps of one man and two dogs carrying the journey forward. The first spring without Evelyn arrived more gently than Logan had expected. There were no midnight dreams that jolted him awake, no soft whispers echoing through the darkness. There was only a quiet emptiness, not one that tore apart his heart, but one that cast a mist over every memory. On the hillside behind the house, the snow melted earlier than usual. Logan began planting the first seeds of lavender, the kind Evelyn used to say, "Smells like a peaceful morning." Ranger sat at the garden's edge, his ears alert, his eyes fixed on the far-off pine ridge. He didn't bark. He didn't howl. He simply waited, as if he were expecting something. Or someone. Each morning, Logan read a page from Evelyn's notebook. Some pages were scrawled in half-asleep handwriting, others crossed out and rewritten in red ink. But every entry shared the same truth. Loving a dog isn't about the commands you give. It's about how you listen when it says nothing whatsoever. Finn had started official training at the VA Therapy Dog Center. On his first evaluation, he ignored most of the commands. But when a veteran sat trembling on a wooden bench, head down, Finn walked over and gently laid his head on the man's knee. The man wept. The trainer wrote only one line. "Dogs don't need to learn love. They just need the chance to show it." Ranger still accompanied Logan to the senior home each week. He didn't perform tricks. He wasn't taught anything new, but he always knew where to stand, whom to sit beside, and when to leave. One day, a woman with fading memory wrapped her arms around Ranger and whispered, "You're my son, aren't you? You've come back to your mother, haven't you?" Ranger didn't answer. He simply pressed his head gently into her chest. At a major therapy program gathering, Logan was asked to speak. He stood with the microphone, scanning a room full of people who carried wounds no one could see. He said, "I used to think loss was the end, but Evelyn taught me that. Sometimes what you lose becomes the eyes someone else needs to find their way." He didn't say more. Ranger stepped up to the stage. He didn't perform, didn't bow. He just stood, silent. Everyone looked at him, but his eyes were fixed far beyond them toward the light filtering through the morning curtains. That evening, back at the farm, Logan wrote a letter by hand. He didn't know who it was for, but he wrote, "If you're reading this, maybe you've lost something too. I once did. But a dog taught me how to love again, not through grand gestures, but by sitting still and waiting until I was ready." On the desk, Evelyn's photo no longer made Logan ache. Now it was the place Ranger glanced toward every morning, as if to ask, "Where do we go next?" And Logan always answered with a smile, "Where she once hoped we would." That night, a gentle rain began to fall. Logan stepped onto the porch, carrying the wool blanket Evelyn used to wrap Ranger in during their coldest winters. He spread it across the bench. Ranger and Finn joined him. No need to call. All three sat together, quiet, steady. The wind whispered beneath the eaves. And in that moment, Logan heard her not clearly, not distinctly, but just enough to make his heart catch. And his lips curl into a smile. "Well done, boys. Keep walking. I showed you the way. Now it's your turn." 6 months after Evelyn passed, her legacy kept growing, not through words, but through actions. Her legacy continued to flourish through the silent pulse of hearts that never ceased to believe. Time doesn't heal every wound, but it has a way of giving meaning to the pain. The first spring without Evelyn arrived more gently than Logan expected. There were no more dreams that woke him in the night. No soft whispers in the dark. Just a quiet hollowness, Not the kind that shatters the heart, but the kind that covers every memory in a gentle mist. On the hillside behind the house, the snow melted early that year. Logan began planting the first seeds of lavender, the kind Evelyn once said smells like a peaceful morning. Ranger sat at the garden's edge, ears pricked, his eyes focused on the faraway pines. He didn't bark, didn't howl. He just waited as if for something, or someone. Each morning, Logan read a page from Evelyn's notebook. Some pages were scribbled in the middle of the night. Others were crossed out and rewritten in red ink. But every line spoke the same truth. Loving a dog isn't about the commands you give. It's about how you listen when it says nothing whatsoever. Finn began his official training at the VA Therapy Dog Center. During the first evaluation, he ignored every command. But when a trembling veteran sat silently on a wooden bench, head bowed, Finn walked over and rested his head gently on the man's knee. The man cried. The trainer wrote only one sentence. Dogs don't need to be taught love. They just need the chance to show it. Ranger still joined Logan at the nursing home every week. He didn't perform. Ranger didn't require any retraining, but he always knew where to stand, who to sit beside, and when to leave. One afternoon, a woman with fading memory hugged Ranger tightly and whispered, "You're my son, aren't you? You came back to me, didn't you?" Ranger didn't answer. He just pressed his head gently into her chest. During a major therapy conference, Logan was invited to speak. He took the microphone and looked around at a room full of people carrying invisible scars. He said, "I used to think loss was the end, but Evelyn taught me. Sometimes what you lose becomes the eyes someone else needs to find their way." He didn't say more. Ranger stepped up beside him. He didn't bow, didn't perform. He simply stood quiet. Still. His gaze wasn't on the room. His gaze was focused on the light slipping through the morning curtains. That afternoon, back at the farm, Logan wrote a letter by hand. He didn't know who it was for, but he wrote, "If you're reading this, maybe you've lost something too. I once did. But a dog taught me how to love again. This was not achieved through grand gestures, just by sitting still and waiting for me to be ready." On his desk, Evelyn's photo no longer made him ache. Now it was where Ranger's eyes landed each morning, as if to ask, "Where are we going next?" And Logan always answered with a smile, "To where she once hoped we'd go." That night, a soft rain fell. Logan stepped onto the porch, carrying the wool blanket Evelyn once used for Ranger during the coldest winters. He spread it across the bench. Ranger and Finn joined him without being called. All three sat together, steady, quiet. The wind whispered beneath the roof. And for a moment, Logan heard her. Not clearly, not in words, but enough to stir something deep in his chest and curl his lips into a smile. "Well done, boys. Keep going. I showed you the way. Now it's your turn." A week after the conference, Logan received a letter from a 10-year-old boy in Colorado. "I saw the video of Ranger saving someone. My dad said that dog isn't afraid of anything. But I think he is. He just chooses to do what's right, even when he's scared." Logan printed it out and pinned it to the wooden board in the hallway. Ranger stood beside it, watching the paper sway in the breeze, his eyes calm and steady. That evening, Logan took out a stack of blank paper and began writing. This wasn't a memoir. Logan began writing a training guide instead. The first page read, "Training Trust by Evelyn Carter." Finn lay sleeping under the desk, paws twitching in a dream. Ranger lifted his head to watch Logan write no questions in his eyes. He already understood. Legacy isn't what you remember. It's how someone continues the journey with a heart that's still warm. Logan closed the notebook and rose from his chair. Ranger lay near the fireplace. Finn's head rested on his father's leg. Both slept soundly, quiet silhouettes in peace. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky had opened to a soft silver dome. 6 months had passed. And now, they were officially a team. Ranger and Finn, under Logan's care, were certified as a special therapy duo for PTSD veterans at the regional VA center. The story of Evelyn and Ranger, from those early days through the flood and the hearing that changed everything, was framed and placed in the main corridor of the center. Beneath it hung a small plaque that read, "For those who never gave up, even when they were forgotten." Whenever someone new arrived, Ranger was always the first to approach, not intruding, not pressing close, just sitting nearby, quietly saying, "I'm here, whenever you're ready." Finn was younger, sometimes clumsy, but he always followed Ranger's lead, watching, listening, and learning that presence speaks louder than instruction. Logan never called it work. To him, it was a mission. It was a quiet continuation of what Evelyn had once done. On a late autumn afternoon, as the mist crept down the hillside, Logan sat under the porch roof, legs stretched out, holding the old ultrasonic whistle. He didn't blow it. He simply held it as if it were an unneeded signal. Ranger lay on his left, Finn curled on his right. Both stared across the fields where the sun dipped behind the ridge. No one spoke. But in the wind that swept across the grass, something stirred, not the sound of a whistle, but the voice of time itself, gently reminding all hearts that had ever broken. If there is anything strong enough to hold them together again, it is loyalty, spoken not in words but passed silently, from one person to another through a dog named Ranger. Sometimes, the deepest wounds don't come from betrayal itself, but from being blamed for something we didn't do. Like Evelyn, many of us have faced suspicion, false accusations, or the sting of abandonment, all while trying to protect the very things we love most. If you're in a place where trust has been broken or your integrity is under fire, take a breath. You don't need to fight with fury. Fight with proof, with patience, and with clarity. Keep your dignity. Document what matters. Lean on those who believe you. And above all, protect your peace, especially if children, pets, or others depend on you. You may not be able to control the lies told about you, but you can choose what truth you stand in. Evelyn didn't seek revenge. She sought justice, quietly, powerfully, and in doing so, she didn't just protect Ranger, she passed on a legacy of loyalty, resilience, and healing. Now we'd like to hear from you. Have you ever faced false accusations, experienced betrayal, or had to reconstruct trust following a breach? How did you protect yourself or those you love without losing yourself? Share your story in the comments. You never know who might feel less alone because of it. Your experience matters. Your voice belongs here. Let's heal together. Before he was called Valor, the dog was known as Shadow. Shadow was a German shepherd with a deep black coat, eyes the color of winter dusk, and a steady gait that carried the quiet strength of something ancient. Everyone who met him agreed. He didn't need training to be a guardian. That instinct was already written in his heart. His family lived at the end of a red dirt road in a small wooden house, nestled in the countryside. The house was old, but always warm with laughter. There were 3 people: a tall, quiet father, a mother who sang each morning while watering her plants, and a 6-year-old girl named Shadow's best friend in the whole wide world. Every morning, Lila would be the first to hug Shadow around the neck, nuzzling her face into the soft fur behind his ears. Shadow would lick her cheek, wagging his tail gently, as if waiting for the one thing that made each day matter: how long their walk would be today. In the afternoons, when Lila played outside, Shadow stayed on the porch, eyes locked on her every move. Once, when she tripped on the gravel and scraped her knee, Shadow didn't bark or panic. He simply walked over, licked the wound, and lay beside her until her tears faded. Each morning, as her father's blue pickup truck revved to life, Shadow would trot around it twice like a sacred ritual, then wait at the door, silent and alert for a single wave. That wave meant one thing: we'll come home together. Shadow never got into the truck unless called, but he always waited for that promise. Until one day, the wave didn't come. No warning. There was no sign of thunder in the sky, just a sudden rainstorm, a sharp curve, a scream of tires, and silence. The truck lost control, tumbled off a slick mountain bend, and rolled into darkness. When the police arrived at the crash site, all they found among the mangled steel and rain-smeared glass was a dog, caked in mud, barking until his voice broke. Shadow stood guard beside Lila's small, lifeless body, her arm the only thing visible beneath the twisted wreck. When rescue workers tried to pull her from the wreckage, Shadow lunged, howled, and fought to keep them away, as if there was still time. It took 3 grown men to hold him down. "He's not injured," one whispered, "but something's broken inside." Shadow was taken to a local rescue shelter. A vet stitched up a wound on his leg, gave him antibiotics, laid him on a soft blanket. But he wouldn't eat. "I won't sleep." Every time the door creaked open, Shadow would lift his head, ears perked, eyes searching the hall. Then nothing. He'd lower his head, turn to the wall. This pattern continued for 3 days in a row. That winter was cruel. Shadow disappeared into the forest, vanishing like smoke. He learned to find water by following the wind, ate tree roots to survive, and curled beneath pine trees to hide from the wind. But no chill could touch the emptiness he carried, the silence where Lila's laughter had once lived, the memory of her hand, her mother's, her father's eyes. Every morning, he returned to the highest ridge and started toward the road. Whenever he heard an engine, he'd spring to his feet. But no one came. No blue truck, no voice, no waves. Some nights, as rain tickled softly on fallen leaves, Shadow curled in on himself, ears low, eyes closed as if asleep. But he never truly rested. Deep within, the faint ring of the bell on Lila's collar continued to resonate. People living near the woods began whispering about a black dog roaming the forest edge, his eyes lighting up when he saw children playing, only to vanish the moment anyone approached. The kids called him the Black Ghost, never knowing he'd once been a brother, a best friend, a loyal protector. On a gray winter afternoon, as the first snowflake touched the frozen earth, Shadow raised his head from beneath a rock ledge. The wind carried a sound like a wind chime, soft and distant. Not real. However, it was enough to awaken a slumbering heart. For the first time in months, Shadow stood, leaving the only place he knew. He didn't know where he was going, or why. He only knew somewhere out there, someone needed protection. And even with a heart that had once shattered, Shadow hadn't forgotten how to love. The shelter staff had grown fond of him. People flocked to adopt him, but Shadow merely snarled, refusing to accept their touch. A week later, under a light drizzle, he vanished again. He leaped over the fence like a shadow, leaving no trace behind. He was no longer the shadow of the little house at the end of the road that night. Those who suffer the most often remain silent. Valor didn't bark for justice. He didn't chase recognition. He just showed up again and again when no one else did. Not because he was told to, but because love doesn't need instructions. If you've ever been betrayed, falsely accused, or silently blamed for something you didn't do, remember this: you don't need to shout to prove your truth. Stay calm. Protect your dignity. Your actions should have a greater impact than the rumors. Gather what you need: evidence, support, and clarity, and protect what matters most: your peace, your children, and your integrity. Even in the midst of the darkest storms, quiet strength leaves the most lasting legacy. Valor didn't need a voice to be heard. He just never gave up on the one who needed him most, Hope. And now, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been wrongly accused? Or stood by someone when everyone else walked away? Share your story in the comments, not just to be heard, but to remind someone else they're not alone. Your voice may be precisely what someone else needs today. What's the one moment in your life where you choose to love even when no one is watching? The rain poured down like the sky was unleashing its rage. Wind howled through the leafless trees, slicing the night with a cry that sounded too much like sorrow. A lone figure moved along the edge of town, thin and soaked, barely a shadow in the mist as headlights flickered and vanished down the highway. It was Shadow. His once glossy coat was now soaked and matted with mud. Every step he took sank into the wet ground, heavy and slow. His belly was drawn tight from hunger, ribs pressing through his skin. Still, Shadow kept walking. No destination, no path, just one thing left: keep going. The wind lashed through the streets, tossing broken branches across the road. The air reeked of mud, exhaust fumes, and the iron sting of rain-soaked metal. Shadow turned quietly into a narrow alley where trash bins had toppled under the storm. He dipped his head, sniffing, pushing aside soggy cardboard. He found only one crumb of bread, a piece of spoiled meat, or anything else. Nothing, only wet paper and bitter rainwater. He didn't bark, didn't whimper. He simply turned and continued walking. The rain grew heavier, stabbing at his raw skin like tiny needles. A gust of wind slammed into him, knocking him off balance. But he didn't fall. He'd seen worse days than this, just never be so lonely. Elsewhere in town, a faint golden glow spilled from the windows of a gas station. Shadow stopped under a small awning, breathing hard. Cold seeped deep into his joints, stiffening his muscles. He didn't shiver, but his legs were beginning to tremble. He looked inside, and two men were laughing over coffee. A small heater glowed near the wall. Each time someone opened the door, a wave of warmth spilled out. Shadow stepped forward, quiet as a ghost. But before he could reach the door, a voice shouted from inside. "Get out of here! Go on!" A broom flew through the air. It didn't hit him, but the sound was sharp enough. Shadow jumped back, startled. He didn't bark, didn't protest. He simply turned around and walked back into the rain. It kept falling, like the sky was trying to wash something away: grief, memories, maybe even Shadow himself. His survival instinct, once the strongest part of his breed, was fading, battered by every drop. This was a dog who used to wait at the gate for Lila, who knew the sound of her laugh by heart. But tonight, beneath an angry sky in a town that didn't know his name, Shadow wasn't even sure who he was anymore. He turned into another alley, darker and narrower than the last. No streetlights reached this far. An old cardboard box leaned against the wall, filled with rusted cans and a discarded coat. Shadow crawled inside, curled up not to rest, but just to hide from the wind. His stomach ached, his throat was dry, his eyes closed halfway, but his mind stayed alert. Another gust of wind ripped through the alley, blowing the coat out into the rain. Shadow didn't chase it. He lay still, breathing slowly and quietly. Maybe he was waiting for the rain to stop. Maybe he was just waiting for a reason to go on. He wandered through a brick-paved path behind an old restaurant, long since shuttered. Rain dripped from a leaky roof. splashing into a black puddle that shimmered under dim streetlight. Shadow stopped to drink. The muddy water burned his tongue with the taste of rusted metal. But it was all there was. He drank anyway. Pain crept from his belly to his chest. It was more than just a feeling of hunger and emptiness. The pain intensifies with each passing moment. His front leg dragged slightly now, the old wound in his knee flaring in the cold. Every step on the rough pavement sent a spike of pain. But he didn't stop. Stopping would mean surrendering to the overwhelming hunger. He allowed the cold to engulf him completely. Ahead, by the back door of a bakery, a bin of discarded food waited in the dark. Shadow detected the scent of old butter and faint cheese. His eyes lit up. He hobbled toward it, bracing his paws against the bin's edge. Then a crash. A glass bottle shattered near his legs. Someone had thrown it from an upstairs window. "Scram! No strays allowed here!" The voice cut through the night. Shards of glass sprayed across the wet pavement, slicing a shallow wound along Shadow's hind leg. He stumbled backward, fell, and his rear leg screamed in pain. He didn't cry out, didn't howl. He stood up slowly, quietly. He then turned and walked away once more. Blood mixed with rainwater, trailing behind him like forgotten memories. Far off in the distance, the wail of an ambulance faded into silence. The town had gone to sleep. Only the lost ones were still moving. Shadow was still one of them. The rain hadn't stopped. The sky was a dark canvas soaked in ink, and the wind howled through rain-drenched trees like a mourning voice, swallowed by the night. Beneath that weight of silence and storm, Shadow lay curled in the narrow gap between two old trash bins, his body shivering from the cold, eyes half shut, ears still twitching with instinct. Then, a sound. Soft, fragile, like a hiccup caught on the wind. Shadow's eyes opened, his ears lifted, alert. Another sound, clearer this time, a sob. The voice was thin and broken. It wasn't the sound of a cat, not a creaking branch. The sound was that of a human being, small, weak. A baby was crying. Shadow rose on his front legs. His joints ached, stiff from the cold, but instinct overruled pain. He stepped out from his shelter, and rain immediately slammed against his face, his neck, and his spine. But he didn't retreat. He moved forward, slow and sure, guided by the fragile sound, his paws sinking deep into the soaked earth with each step. The crying led him to the edge of an old, forgotten park, where bare trees bent under the wind's weight. Shadow crept through wet brush, approaching a fallen tree trunk rotting in the grass. There, hidden beneath a mess of soggy leaves, branches, and trash, was a dented white foam box, warped and dirty. The box trembled with each whimper. Shadow stepped closer, lowered his nose to sniff. A wave of scent flooded his senses. Faint milk, raw skin, and damp cloth. The aroma was reminiscent of a fresh start. The scent was that of a child. Gently, he raised a paw and swept away the layer of leaves covering the lid. Inside, curled tightly in a soaked and threadbare towel, was a newborn girl. Her lips were blue, her hands clenched into tiny fists from the cold. Her eyes were closed tight, her entire body trembling. Each cry faded like a flicker on the edge of extinction. Shadow stood frozen for a moment. The wind whipped harder. Rain poured into the box. No footsteps, no light. No one is coming. And then, without command and without hesitation, Shadow moved. He gripped the edge of the foam box with his teeth, carefully choosing a spot that wouldn't hurt the child. And he began to pull. The box was heavy. The mud made it slide sideways. The wind kept pushing it off course. But Shadow didn't stop. He backed up, inch by inch, legs straining, teeth clenched around the box's edge. His eyes squinted against the rain. But he didn't blink. He dragged the box across the sunken field, up onto the cracked edge of the road. Every time it snagged, he paused, panting, then pulled again. Once, it tipped dangerously. Shadow lunged to steady it, smearing mud across his chest. But he caught it. The baby stayed safe, and I did not give up. At the roadside, headlights swept through the rain. Cars rushed past. None slowed. No one saw. Shadow barked. Once, then again, and again. The first sounds he'd made in weeks, now rising like a desperate prayer. The wind scattered his voice, but he barked louder, throat raw, sending out the only message that mattered. There's a life here. Help her. One car slowed, then drove on. Another honked and disappeared into the night. When his voice failed him, when the pain in his throat turned his howls into silence, Shadow did the only thing he had left. He lay down. He pressed his body against the foam box. The wind battered his back. Rain poured over his fur, but he didn't move. His eyes stayed wide, scanning every light, every motion. He curled tighter, shielding the fragile body from cold and storm. His warmth seeped into the box, the only barrier between the baby and the dark. No one saw, no one knew. But Shadow was there. He wasn't there to receive praise, not for instinct. He simply couldn't walk away. The wind slashed across his face. Rain battered his spine like nails falling from the sky. Shadow's tongue was dry and raw, his jaw aching from gripping the foam box too long. But he did not stop. The asphalt ahead was slick like glass, rainwater coursing through every crack in small rivers. Far in the distance, headlights occasionally blinked, each beam of light a fragile shard of hope in a world swallowed by storm. Shadow carefully moved the foam box through the mud, inch by inch. His legs trembled violently now, but his claws clawed into the earth, anchoring him each time the box tilted. It wasn't a large box, but inside it was an entire life. And to Shadow that was sacred, something no pain could loosen from his grasp. Inside, the newborn girl was still breathing, but barely. Her chest rose in shallow, fluttering gasps beneath the soaked towel. Her hands had stopped curling. Her skin had gone pale, lips turning blue. Every time Shadow glanced down, panic surged through him. He pulled faster, desperately. After what felt like an eternity locked in wind and rain, Shadow reached the edge of the highwayman's open strip of asphalt, slightly elevated, where headlights were brighter and traffic faster. But it also meant exposure. Nothing stood between them and the heart of the storm now. Shadow placed himself in front of the box. His body faced the traffic. And then he barked. The first bark tore through the silence, hoarse and ragged. Not the deep, proud voice of a German shepherd, but the scraped, torn sound of a creature pushed to its edge, but not willing to surrender. A truck barreled past, water spraying like waves behind its wheels. One tire missed the box by inches. Shadow flinched but didn't retreat. He barked again. And again. A white sedan approached. Its lights caught Shadow full in the face. He stood taller, raised his head, barked louder. The car honked and drove past. Its taillights vanished, leaving only cold rain behind. Shadow didn't understand why they wouldn't stop. But he didn't quit. He sprinted along the roadside, chasing lights, barking at every incoming beam. At one point, a car screeched to a stop, the driver yelling out, "Get out of the road, you crazy mutt!" Shadow darted back to the foam box. He looked inside. The baby was still there, but she wasn't trembling anymore. Her breaths were barely audible now, spaced out like whispers. Her towel clung to her skin, completely drenched. Lightning exploded overhead. Thunder shattered the sky in two. Shadow braced himself, standing between the girl and the storm. The wind slammed into him, nearly toppling him, but he didn't budge. Not now. Not when that tiny spark of life still clung on. Another truck approached. This time Shadow stepped into the road. Not far. Just enough. He stood still, eyes locked on the lights. The driver slammed the brakes, horn blaring like a warning siren. Shadow didn't flinch. He only stepped back when the truck came close, returning to the box, his body collapsing beside it. Rain was coming down harder now. The road was a silver mirror of flood and noise. Mud spilled from the curb and pooled around them. Shadow pressed his body tight against the box, curling his spine around it, shielding it from the storm. His back was soaked, his paws were thick with grime. But he didn't care. He watched the baby with soft eyes. Eyes that whispered, "I'm here." From inside the box came a faint sound, barely more than a breath. But it was there. She was still holding on. Shadow lifted his head. Hope. He barked again. His voice was so frayed it sounded like broken wires, but he forced it out. Each bark was a plea, each breath was a battle. And if anyone had walked past that moment and stayed long enough to see, they would have witnessed something unforgettable. A soaked, starving dog, ribs showing, legs shaking, eyes wide with rain, not trying to find shelter, but guarding a fragile, flickering life against the storm. Shadow barked, and barked, and barked, until there was no bark left. Until his legs gave out beneath him, until a different light, this one not from a car but from a flashlight, cut through the darkness. Shadow raised his head, eyes wide, ears twitching. Someone was coming. A small figure, hunched under a long raincoat, was running, umbrella in one hand, light in the other. Footsteps splashing through puddles, breath visible in the freezing air. Shadow didn't bark anymore. He just started. It seemed as though the world had finally taken notice. The flashlight wavered in the distance. A woman's silhouette flickered through the curtain of rain, slowly making her way toward the roadside. But she was still far off. It was still just Shadow and the child. Everything else in the world, people and mercy, was absent. The rain kept falling. Heavy, icy. No more thunder, no lightning, just the steady beat of raindrops, like muffled sobs swallowed by the night. The highway was deserted. The last of the traffic had passed. No one turned around. No one stopped. Shadow lay curled around the foam box, his thin frame coated in mud, body wrapped protectively around the only warmth left in the world. He had folded himself tight to block the late winter wind slicing through the night. His back was caked in grime, ears pinned down, paws drawn close, his spine curved like a sheltering wall. Every time the wind swept past, his entire body trembled. But he didn't move, not a single inch. Inside the box, the baby girl was still barely breathing. Each breath was so fragile it made Shadow's own heart stutter in rhythm. Then, a faint whimper. To Shadow, it was just a thin thread of sound, ringing like a cry from the bottom of the world. He lowered his head, gently licking the edge of the box, then lifted it again, eyes scanning the night. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no lights. And then, like an old scar split open by the cold wind, memory came roaring back. Shadow was 5 weeks old. That was the day his first family welcomed him home. A little girl with chestnut hair in a ponytail ran across the porch, laughing. "Lila!" her mother called. The girl stopped, hugged Shadow, and giggled uncontrollably as he licked her cheek. One fall afternoon, she'd fallen from the swing, scraping her knee. Shadow had been the first to reach her, lying beside her, pressing his nose to the wound, staying there until her tears stopped. No one told him to do it. It was instinct. Shadow had always known. Fragile things need protecting. Then the accident. Darkness. Blood. Sirens screaming. They pulled Lila from the wreckage. Shadow, his voice hoarse, attempted to reach her but found himself repelled. And then, everything was gone. The family. The warmth. Her voice. The last memory burned into him was Lila's small hand dangling lifelessly from the stretcher. Shadow never forgives himself. He had survived, but saved no one. Since that night, the sound of a child's cry has torn through his chest with the intensity of lightning. As if something in the past was calling him back, whispering, "This time don't fail." He lowered his head and rested his chin on the foam lid, eyes locked on the baby. She was still there, still breathing, barely. The soaked towel clung to her skin, her breath vanished into the rain, but she was alive, and Shadow would not let her go. A motorbike zipped by in the distance, a rider in a raincoat, unaware. Its engine echoed once, then disappeared into the storm. Shadow didn't bark. His voice was long gone. He closed his eyes, but he did not sleep. He was guarding, alone. Each time the baby's breathing faded, his ears twitched. Each gust of wind made him curl tighter, pushing his body closer against the box. He coughed once harsh and sharp from the cold, from exhaustion, and from hours of rain in his lungs. His throat burned, but he didn't shift. The wind changed direction. Now it hit him square in the face. Wet fur clung to his skin. Water ran down his spine in freezing rivulets. But Shadow didn't flinch. Not this time. Every minute crawled like a lifetime. His eyes were dull now, no longer glowing, but they stayed open, watching, guarding. Shadow chose to stay when the whole world had turned its back on him. The rain began to ease. The wind lost its scream. Overhead, the pitch-black clouds faded into ash gray. A faint glow, barely a whisper, began to rise from the horizon, and then light returned. But not from a car, from a flashlight. A woman was running toward them now, slow but steady, her form outlined by the dim gray of morning. One hand gripped a flashlight, the other held an umbrella bent by wind. She spotted curled in place, unmoving but unyielding, and she ran faster. Shadow stirred. His legs trembled beneath him. He raised his head, and in that moment his eyes shone again. Not because he believed, but because at last someone saw them. The night had passed, but the cold clung stubbornly to the earth and to the motionless body of a dog curled on the edge of the highway. The storm had tried to wash away all hope, every last trace of it. And yet, the soft crunch of footsteps broke the stillness of dawn. The first light of morning crept through the bare trees along the roadside. The rain had stopped. The wind had calmed. Mist hovered low over the muddy ground in the dying breath of winter. The town was still asleep. Booter, like always, was up before the sun. Wrapped in her long gray coat, her shoes squelching with every step, she walked the same familiar path to the bus stop. For 25 years, the same road, the same routine. She lived alone in a small house on the edge of town and worked mornings at the local diner. But something about this morning was different. At the bend where an old oak tree stood like a lone sentinel, Eleanor stopped. Her eyes landed on something strange. Near the edge of the road, half buried in mud and weeds at a beaten, dirt-smeared foam box. And beside it, a German shepherd lay collapsed, drenched from nose to tail, caked in filth. But what made her heart jolt wasn't the dog. It was the box. It moved. Eleanor's breath caught. She rushed forward, her boots sinking into the soaked earth. As she neared, the dog stirred. Shadow lifted his head, eyes cloudy from rain and red from exhaustion, but still wide open, watching her, following her every move. Eleanor is frozen. She had never seen a gaze like that before, not from a dog, not even from a person. It wasn't fear, it wasn't anger, it was something deeper, a silent plea not for himself, but for another. That gaze struck something deep inside her chest. She knelt down, her fingers trembling as she opened the lid of the foam box. Inside, swaddled in a rain-soaked cloth, lay a newborn girl with ashen skin, blue lips, and a body too small and too still. She wasn't crying. She wasn't moving. "Oh my God!" Eleanor gasped, voice breaking. Her fingers fumbled for her phone, dialing 911 through shivering hands. She hit the wrong number 3 times before finally hearing the call connect. "There's a baby! A baby! She's cold, she's not breathing. Send an ambulance. Please, hurry!" As she waited, Eleanor ripped off her coat, wrapped it tightly around the baby, and held her close against her chest, pressing her body's warmth into the fragile life in her arms. Her hand rested on the infant's chest. Nothing. No movement. No, please. She tilted her head, pressing her cheek to the baby's mouth. A faint whisper of air brushed her skin. Still alive. She wept. "Sweetheart, stay with me," she whispered. "You hear me? Don't give up." Her heart twisted in her chest. The feeling was too familiar. It echoed that awful day years ago when she held her own daughter, born too soon, so cold, so still. She had stood in that same helpless space, cradling a life she couldn't save. She had never told anyone. But now, on this muddy roadside in the gray hush of dawn, the pain returned, like it had never left. She looked over at Shadow. He was still lying there, too weak to rise, too drained to lift his head again. But his eyes never left the child. He watched her like a father watches a daughter, filled with nothing but fierce, aching hope, not because he needed saving, but because he couldn't bear to lose one more soul. Eleanor leaned closer. "It was you, wasn't it?" she whispered. "You kept her alive." Shadow blinked. Slowly, for the first time, he moved just enough to press his nose gently against the box, then let his head fall again, like every last ounce of him had been spent getting her to this moment. And Eleanor, who hadn't cried in years, couldn't stop the tears now. She pulled her coat tighter around the baby, holding on to the little spark of life with everything she had. Her heart beat faster, not from panic, but from something else. Something stirring. Something that had been asleep for a long time began to stir. Far off, the sound of a siren began to rise, first distant, then louder. Subsequently, the volume reached a level that was sufficient to block out the surrounding wind. Eleanor stood on shaky legs. Her body ached from cold and emotion. She looked down at Shadow. "They're coming," she said breathlessly. "Just a little longer." Shadow didn't respond. He only closed his eyes. Not to sleep, but to let go of the weight he had carried through the storm, the hunger, the night, and the terrible silence of human absence. Eleanor dropped to her knees and laid a trembling hand on his muddy head. "Well done," she whispered. "You're a hero. Do you hear me? I'm here now." The ambulance lights splashed across the roadside. The door swung open. A paramedic jumped out, racing toward them. Eleanor raised the baby into the air, her tears mixing with the morning dew. "She's alive," she cried. "She's still alive." They took the child Hope, Eleanor would later call her, and immediately began life-saving measures. Another medic turned toward the dog, but Eleanor lifted a hand. "Wait, let me." She leaned down and gently wrapped her arms around the wet, freezing body of the dog who had refused to give up. For the first time in years, Eleanor held a life in her arms not out of duty, but gratitude. A nameless dog had reminded her of something she thought she'd lost forever. That if breath still moves within, then it is never too late to save a life, whether human or canine. And as the sun finally rose above the frost-tipped trees, painting the sky with gold, Shadow lay still in her arms. But his eyes, just for a moment, flickered open and saw the light. The sirens faded into the morning mist, leaving a silence so tender it felt sacred. On the edge of the highway, where mud and memory clung to every inch of ground, a life had just been pulled back from death's hands. Eleanor stood motionless, her arms still tingling with the warmth of the tiny body she'd passed to the medics. Beside her, Shadow lay still, drained, eyes dim but fixed on the distant glow of the ambulance's red lights disappearing into dawn. Millstone Memorial Hospital was usually quiet at that hour, but today the emergency wing stirred with urgency. A small stretcher rolled through the entrance, surrounded by nurses, doctors, and machines. On it, swaddled in a fresh, warm blanket, was a newborn girl, skin pale, breath faint, but still alive. Outside the glass doors, Eleanor stood with her hands clasped tightly before her chest. Her breath caught somewhere between hope and fear. Beneath the sterile light and the soft beep of machines, the worst memories of her life clawed their way back to the surface. The doors swung open. A young doctor stepped out, mask removed, tension in his eyes giving way to a gentle calm when he saw her. "You found the baby?" he asked. Eleanor nodded, barely able to speak. "Will she make it?" Her voice cracked under the weight of the question. The doctor paused, then nodded. "She was severely hypothermic. Her heart was failing, but she's stable now. If you'd been even an hour later—" He didn't finish the sentence. Eleanor collapsed into a nearby chair. She covered her face with her hands as tears streamed down, not out of fear, but from a relief that softened the edges of grief. This time there was no need for anyone to perish. The veterinary wing behind the hospital was also treating Shadow. A kind-eyed vet gently washed the mud from his fur, administered pain relief, and started fluids. Shadow didn't resist. He lay still, too worn out to move. But each time the door creaked, his ears twitched as he listened. "He won't eat," the vet said, shaking her head. "Won't sleep either. He just keeps looking toward the ER." Eleanor walked in quietly and sat beside the examination table. She said nothing, just reached out her hand. Shadow, slowly, achingly, pushed himself forward. Then he rested his head in her lap as if it were the only safe place left on earth. She stroked his head, eyes still brimming. "She's alive," she whispered. "We did it, okay? We did it." The next morning, in the neonatal care unit, Eleanor was invited in. The little girl lay in an incubator, her skin now pink with returning life. Eleanor's fingers twitched gently, with one hand gripping the edge of a fresh blanket as if she was afraid of losing the warmth. A young nurse beside her smiled and asked, "Would you like to name her? We haven't filed anything official yet." Eleanor looked at the baby for a long time. It didn't feel like duty. It didn't feel like charity. It felt like something deeper, an invisible thread binding her grief to this new, fragile flame of life. She smiled softly and said, "Hope. Her name is Hope." The nurse repeated it with a glow in her voice. "Hope. That's beautiful. Like a little miracle." Word spread through the hospital like sunlight through fog. A newborn girl, rescued from a snowstorm, protected all night by a stray dog, saved by a solitary woman. The scene was reminiscent of a fanciful tale. Nurses started calling her Little Hope. Everyone who passed her crib paused, smiled, and whispered blessings. Shadow was moved to a recovery room near the nursery. Every morning, a nurse cracked open the glass so he could see Hope. His eyes lit up each time she stirred. Once, when she cried, Shadow pawed at the door gently, urgently, as if asking permission to comfort her. It didn't take long for everyone to see it. Hope and Shadow could not be separated. When Hope slept, Shadow would rest his head on the bench beside the window, eyes half closed but always alert. When she was awake, their eyes would meet across the glass. Quiet, knowing. It was as if they had both experienced something so enormous and unspoken that only they could understand it. Eleanor saw it, too. And in that quiet truth, she finally understood something herself. She was no longer alone. Hope was the life she had once lost. Shadow was the witness to a night the world could never imagine. And she, once believing herself a forgotten thread in a vast, uncaring world, has become the bond that held them both. 3 broken hearts began to heal in that small hospital, beneath the hush of beeping monitors and soft footsteps. Together. Hope recovered faster than anyone dared to predict. The nurses began calling her the Little Miracle. However, Eleanor knew there was another life in that hospital, one whose name remained unspoken, the one who had endured the storm without ever being asked to. And she knew it was time he was named for what he truly was. The veterinary wing behind the hospital was quieter than the emergency floor. That's where Shadow lay, motionless on a thin blanket, an IV line running into his front leg, his back leg bandaged. His coat was clean now, but the old wounds remained. The scar along his ear, the swelling at his knee, and the sunken belly that spoke of utter exhaustion. He didn't eat, didn't bark. He only stared through the glass doors, watching for the small cradle that was sometimes pulled by the carriage carrying the child he had guarded with his life. He hasn't touched food all morning, one nurse sighed, but every time the baby goes by, he lifts his head. Another chuckled softly. People around here are calling him Guardian, since he kept her alive through the storm. Eleanor had been standing nearby. She heard them. She stepped in and gently sat beside the dog. "Guardian," she whispered, eyes fixed on him. "That sounds right, but not enough." The dog tilted his head, eyes still red with fatigue, but something faint sparked when Eleanor reached out her hand. "Guardian is someone who protects," she continued softly. "But you stayed. You were stuck in the mud. The storm was upon you. There was death everywhere. You didn't run. You didn't wait for orders. You chose to stay when no one else did." She paused, then looked him straight in the eyes. "Your name is Valor." From that day forward, the hospital staff called him by his true name, Valor. And while he still didn't eat much, whenever someone said it, his ears flicked, his eyes opened, as if he knew he was finally seen. Each morning, Eleanor would roll Hope's cradle past the recovery room. Valor would lift his head, brace his paws, and push himself upright, still shaky, but determined just to see her better. One day, Hope had a crying fit no one could soothe. Eleanor glanced over and said, "Try bringing her closer to Valor." They did. And something extraordinary happened. As soon as the cradle rolled beside him, Hope stopped crying. Her tiny hands waved weakly. Valor stretched his neck, gently resting his chin on the side of the cradle. There was no sound, no, not a command. There was only a quiet understanding between 2 souls who had weathered the storm together. "They know each other," an older doctor murmured. Photos were taken. The story was shared. A dog saves a baby in a blizzard and now refuses to leave her side. In just 2 days, the story garnered 3 million shares. Strangers sent gifts to the hospital: toys, dog treats, and handwritten cards with blessings. But the most important decision came not from the public, but from within. The hospital made a choice: to keep the pair together for as long as needed until someone could give them both a place to call home. Eleanor stepped into the hospital director's office, a paper in hand. An adoption form. "You don't need to debate this," she smiled gently. "I don't think anyone could separate them now, even if they tried." The director smiled back. "Honestly, I was going to suggest keeping them here as hospital mascots, but you're right, a family is better." The day Eleanor signed the papers, Valor lay at her feet, eyes closed, not knowing exactly what was happening, but somehow at peace. That evening, back at the hospital, Eleanor sat beside Hope's bed. Valor curled at her feet, resting his head on the soft mat beside the crib. She reached down and stroked his fur. "You saved her," she whispered. "You kept her warm. You called out when she stopped breathing. And now, you're still here. Still watching." She looked up at Hope now, who was fast asleep, while her hand tightly gripped the edge of her blanket. "Hope means hope," she whispered. "And you, Valor, you're courageous. One of you is the miracle that survived. The other represents the proof that loyalty can endure until the very end." And as the words settled into the quiet room, Valor let out a soft whimper. Barely more than a breath, but just enough for Eleanor to know. He understood. Valor was no longer a solitary figure amidst the chaos. He had a name now and a home. Hope was no longer a nameless infant in an incubator. She was someone now. She had become someone I loved. And when Eleanor opened the door to her house that day, ushering them both inside, she knew with quiet certainty. The life she'd lived before had ended. A new chapter, a new journey had begun. Her home was small and modest, tucked at the end of a quiet street lined with overhanging maple trees. From the living room window, wild lavender peeked through the stone walkway. For over 20 years, Eleanor had lived alone. Eleanor always set the dining table for one person. Eleanor had never shared the couch. Even her bed, which was made for 2 people, had one side that was forever left untouched. But today, everything has changed. She gently placed Hope into a crib she'd just assembled the night before. As she turned, she heard the soft scratch of paws at the door. Valor, asking for permission, not barging in, always gentle, always waiting. Eleanor opened the door. Valor stepped inside, slow and careful. He didn't bark. He did not sniff every corner like a dog discovering a new world. He simply walked in with the stillness of someone entering sacred space. When he passed Hope's crib, he paused. Eleanor watched. She was anticipating his next move. But Valor did not react wildly. He didn't sniff or jump or wag. He simply sat down. He curled up beside the crib in a comfortable position, rested his head against the wooden frame. He watched her intently, just as he had done every day in the hospital. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, stirring a now cold cup of tea, listening to the unfamiliar sounds inside her once silent home. The steady breathing of 2 small lives echoed in her ears. Valor's paws faintly shifted whenever Hope stirred. When Hope twitched in her sleep, the crib slats creaked softly. She tiptoed to the nursery. The nightlight glowed softly, casting a warm hue across Hope's delicate face. She slept soundly, her lips parted slightly, tiny fingers splayed open. Eleanor smiled. She turned to leave, then stopped. Something had changed. Valor was no longer curled in a ball. He had stretched out, his muzzle resting along the crib's wooden rail, and Hope still asleep, had reached out. Her hand, impossibly small, rested gently on Valor's snout. This was not a coincidence. It was a touch. Software natural. It was sufficient to calm both of them. Hope didn't wake, but a faint smile danced across her lips, as if her dreams had shifted, gently rerouted. Valor didn't move, but his ears relaxed, his body loosened, and his eyes, always alert, softened for the first time in days. Eleanor stood frozen. She had never seen a connection so simple, yet so weighty. No words, no gestures, just a touch between two souls, one freshly born into the world, the other nearly forgotten by it. That night, Eleanor laid down a spare mattress beside the crib. She couldn't bear to separate them. After all, she understood something most people didn't. Family isn't always built by blood. It's built by those who stay when you are at your weakest. As she lay down, she reached out and stroked Valor's head. He didn't respond, but she felt his breath rise, then fall like a sigh, like surrender. It felt like he was allowing himself to believe for the first time that he was home. She closed her eyes and whispered into the dark, "You've waited a long time to feel this, haven't you?" Near dawn, Hope stirred from hunger. Eleanor bolted up and began preparing a bottle in the kitchen. As she reached for the formula, she heard movement behind her. Valor was already awake. He sat beside the crib, head tilted up, watching Hope squirm. No bark, no panic, just quiet attention. When Eleanor returned, Hope had not cried. Her tiny hand reached once more toward Valor, as if drawn by instinct. Eleanor smiled softly. "You two have really found each other," she whispered. Later that morning, neighbors dropped by, curious, kind, and wide-eyed. Everyone wanted to meet the miracle baby and the brave dog. One woman asked with a smile, "Are they really that close?" Eleanor didn't answer right away. She simply pulled the curtain back. Inside the room, Hope was resting in her crib, and Valor, still in the exact same spot, had his head resting on the rail, eyes half closed. When Hope stirred in her sleep, Valor's tail gave a quiet, gentle wag. Eleanor turned and said, "Close enough, that they don't need words at all." Life settled gently into its rhythm beneath that small, maple-lined roof. Hope slept better each night. Valor started eating regularly again. His tail wagged more often. Sometimes he'd even quietly carry Hope's tiny cloth in his mouth, pacing the room like it was his silent game. Peace had moved in, but peace never promises to stay forever. And on that quiet night, when the town held its breath in sleep, the lights in Eleanor's house burst on like a flare. There was no storm, no rain, just a deep, biting cold. Eleanor had fallen into a deeper sleep than usual, worn down from pulling double shifts at the diner to afford Hope's formula and medicine. In the small room beside hers, Hope lay nestled in her crib, wrapped in soft blankets, her tiny body tilted gently to one side. As always, Valor was curled at the foot of the crib, his head resting softly against the wooden rail, eyes half-lidded in watchful calm. Everything seemed normal, until Valor sat up bolt upright, not at a sound, not at a light, but because something had changed in the air. Something is missing. He lifted his ears, eyes wide, nose twitched as he leaned over the crib. No noise, no breath. He nudged her hand. Cold. No response. Valor barked on, then again, a third time, short, sharp, desperate. Without waiting, he bolted toward Eleanor's bedroom. He slammed into the door with his shoulder, barked urgently beside the bed. When she didn't stir, he jumped up, tugging at the blanket with his teeth, then let out a long, piercing howl, the first since that night in the storm. Eleanor jolted awake, heart pounding. "Valor, what's wrong?" He didn't wait. He turned and sprinted back to Hope. Eleanor followed, flicked on the lights, and her breath left her. Hope lay completely still. Her lips had turned a sickening blue. No cry, no breath. "No, no, Hope, please, no!" Eleanor swept her into her arms, trembling, whispering her name. No movement, no sound. Her fingers slipped dialing 911. She had to try twice. "Please! She's an infant! She's not breathing! Please, please, hurry!" The voice on the other end coached her into CPR. Hands shaking, Eleanor pressed her fingers to Hope's tiny chest. She gave her breath after breath, her vision clouded with tears. Valor stood close, growling low and soft, ears flat, as if he too was willing her heart to beat. "Please, Hope," Eleanor whispered. "You already came back once. Don't go now." The sound of sirens sliced through the dark. The door burst open. 2 EMTs raced in. One swept Hope from Eleanor's arms. The other asked questions she barely heard. There was a faint coughing sound. She was experiencing a slight shortness of breath. "She's responding," the medic said. "Get the oxygen." Eleanor collapsed to the floor, hands gripping the leg of the table. Valor walked over and nuzzled his head into her lap. She clutched him close, sobbing. "You did it," she whispered. "Again, Valor. You saved her. Again." At the hospital, Hope was rushed into intensive care. The doctors determined a rare allergic reaction to a new formula combined with the cold air has caused her to stop breathing. 5 more minutes. And she wouldn't have made it. Eleanor sat outside the recovery room, eyes fixed through the glass. Valor lay beside her, eyes locked on Hope. When Hope finally twitched just a little, Eleanor broke into quiet, grateful sobs. A doctor approached her gently. "She's lucky," he said, "but I don't think this was luck." Eleanor looked up, her voice hoarse. "It was Valor. He woke me." The doctor nodded slowly. "I've seen a lot. But that was extinct. No training. Just love." 3 days later, Hope was strong enough to come home. That night, back in their little house, Eleanor redressed the crib. Hope drifted into a deep sleep. Valor resumed his post, eyes wide, ears alert. Eleanor sat beside him, resting her hand on his head. "You're her guardian," she whispered. "No one taught you, no one told you. You just refused to let her go." She looked up at the ceiling. In the quiet, she understood something deeper. The world may not notice. But in this little house, there will always be someone listening to even the smallest breath. Hope stirred. Valor glanced up. A tiny hand reached out in sleep, brushing the fur at his neck. The touch was almost imperceptible. A whisper drifted through the darkness. Valor exhaled slowly, lowering his head closer to her head like a vow, silent and sacred. Eleanor whispered through the hush, "You didn't need training to be a hero, Valor. You just needed a heart." Peace had returned to the little house at the edge of town, but inside Eleanor's chest, gentle waves of unease still lapped at her heart. The memory of nearly losing Hope a second time lingered like a trembling breath she couldn't quite exhale. And when the doctor stepped out of the neonatal recovery room with a paper in hand, every thread of composure Eleanor had carefully held together finally came undone. The recovery room was hushed. Hope lay fast asleep inside her incubator, her tiny fists curled, fingers twitching slightly as if still dreaming of something warm. A soft golden light glowed across her now pink cheeks. No more blue lips, no more frigid stillness. Only the steady beeping of the heart monitor played its quiet tune, a lullaby pulsing through Eleanor's chest. Valor sat at her feet. He didn't bark, didn't move. He simply looked through the glass with steady eyes, as if standing guard over the peace he had fought to win back. The door creaked open. The doctor entered, a folder in hand. His eyes were rimmed with red, probably from lack of sleep, but they softened the moment they met Eleanor's. "She's out of danger," he said gently. Eleanor gripped her hands tightly together. Her voice trembled. If I hadn't woken up..." The doctor shook his head, opening the chart. He pulled out the time log from the intervention report. "If you'd been just 5 minutes later." He paused, then continued quietly. "We wouldn't have been able to save her." 5 minutes. Such a short span of time, yet long enough to separate life from loss. Eleanor's knees buckled. She sank into the chair beside Valor, turning to him slowly. Just 1 second. That's all it would have taken. 1 second more before Valor barked. It was only a matter of time before he became aware of it. It wasn't long before he dashed off and startled her. She didn't want to imagine what that silence would have meant. Eleanor leaned down and wrapped her arms around Valor's neck, pulling him close. Her cheek pressed into his fur, now finally warm again after so many nights of cold. Her tears soaked through her sleeve. "You're her angel. You know that, don't you?" she whispered. Valor didn't move. But his ears slowly folded back, not out of fear, but something deeper. He seemed to grasp the depth of her gratitude for the first time. Eleanor couldn't remember the last time she had called anything an angel. Perhaps it was long ago, before she lost her first daughter in a premature birth more than 20 years ago. Since then, she had buried that word along with every scrap of hope she once dared to hold. But today, she said it again. Out loud, to him. "You don't need words to understand," she murmured. "No one taught you. No one trained you. You don't need a badge or a title. Just being there, that's enough." Her voice broke, crumbling beneath the weight of her unspoken grief. For years, Eleanor had lived believing she had nothing left to protect. But now she knew. Valor didn't just save Hope. He saved her too. 2 days later, Hope was discharged. Hope remained fragile and small, but her cheeks had color again. Her breathing was soft and steady. Back home, Eleanor carried her gently to the nursery and laid her down in the crib beside the sun-warmed window. The morning light painted a golden frame across the floor. Valor followed. No command needed. Eleanor left the door open behind her as she went to prepare Hope's formula. Behind her, Hope stirred. Tiny fingers brushed against the edge of the crib, just enough to graze Valor's snout resting along the rail. He leaned down and gently licked her fingertip. A giggle. This was more than just a simple smile. Hope laughed a real, tiny, bubbling laugh that rippled through her whole body. Eleanor froze in the doorway, her heart catching in her chest. It was the first time she had ever heard that sound. "She's never laughed like that before," she whispered, eyes glassy with wonder. No one had taught Valor how to be gentle with a newborn. No one had shown him how to monitor her breathing. And yet he knew. He knew when Hope needed to be guarded. He knew when Eleanor just needed silence beside her. He understood when to remain vigilant and when staying close was sufficient. Some protectors require no training. They only need a whole heart. That afternoon, Mrs. June from across the street dropped by. She carried a bouquet of wildflowers and a tin of dog biscuits. "I read the story online," she said, smiling. "They're calling Valor a sensory dog. He might even be able to detect physiological changes in people. That's rare, you know. Eleanor chuckled softly. I don't need labels, she replied. To me, he's just family. Did you ever train him? Eleanor stroked the top of Valor's head. Never once, but sometimes the best things don't need teaching. They just need love. Valor rested his head on Eleanor's foot. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He didn't need to. Some connections communicate without the need for words. They're felt and understood. Night settled over the little house like a soft embrace. In the quiet room, the gentle glow of the nightlight cast warm, golden shadows on the ceiling. Eleanor sat in her rocking chair, a worn book resting on her lap, the corner folded from weeks ago. But her eyes weren't on the pages. She was watching two lives, side by side. The crib had been replaced with a floor-level toddler bed. Hope, now over 6 months old, sleeps curled on her side, cheeks rosy, tiny hands loosely tucked near her face. And right beside her, like he had every night since she came home, lay Valor. His head rested lightly against the mattress edge, his body still, breath rising and falling in slow, even waves. Between them, connecting child and guardian, was a tiny, sleeping hand. A soft tuft of Valor's chest fur gently wrapped Hope's fingers. Not tight, not grasping, just resting there, soft and instinctive. But that small, tender touch made Eleanor's eyes sting. Valor didn't move. He did not pull away. He let it as if that little hand was the calmest anchor he'd ever known. He had once curled alone beneath dripping awnings, laid his head on cold pavement, begging morning to come before someone chased him off. He'd weathered nights of rain, snow, and silence. Back then, breathing had been about survival. But tonight, for the first time, he was breathing like someone finally allowed to rest. Eleanor rose and stepped quietly to the doorway, then paused, taking in the scene. A once abandoned dog. The morning began with laughter, those sweet, bubbling giggles that only babies can summon. In the small nursery, Hope sat propped against a pillow, waving her soft cloth like a flag of joy. Valor lay beside her, occasionally nuzzling her cheek with his nose, triggering bursts of laughter that filled the house like sunlight. Eleanor stood quietly in the doorway, cradling a lukewarm cup of tea. Her heart felt full. For the first time in years, peace had a sound. But outside, in the rusted mailbox by the porch, a thin piece of paper had arrived. And it waited quiet and still, ready to pull the sun from Eleanor's sky. She didn't find the letter until after breakfast, while taking out the trash. She rarely checks the mail these days. Bills, ads, maybe the occasional charity envelope. That was all the world ever seemed to send. But today, there it was. A plain white envelope. No stamp, no handwritten name. Just bold official print. Department of Child and Family Services. Her hands trembled. She opened the letter slowly, not because the paper was delicate, but because something inside her already knew. Knew that this wasn't a blessing. And she was right. After reviewing the current financial records and living conditions of Ms. Eleanor H. Marshall, temporary guardian of minor Hope M., we regret to inform you that under Section 3, Clause 8b of the Infant Foster Care Act, your current income and housing do not meet the legal standards for long-term guardianship. Custody of Hope M. will be transitioned back to the state's care next week. That last line cut like glass. Transitioned back to official custody. No questions, no conversations, no mention of what Hope wanted, no consideration of what Hope needed. Just statutes. All that was left was a red ink stamp at the bottom of a cold page. Eleanor collapsed onto the porch step, the letter slipping onto her lap. Valor padded quietly toward her and nudged her hand. She didn't react. Her eyes were fixed on one word, threatening to take everything away. Inside the house, Hope babbled from the nursery, her small voice testing syllables va, va, as her hands patted the pillow's edge. After a moment, even Valor turned away. He sat at the doorframe, hesitant. He was torn between comforting the child inside and staying beside the woman whose heart had just cracked open. Eleanor drifted back into the house like a ghost. She sank into her chair, letter in hand, reading it again as if it might say something different the second time. But it didn't. "They want to take her away," she whispered. Valor stood and let out a low, soft whine. He stepped in front of her, eyes locked with hers, as if to ask, "Why?" Eleanor placed her palm on his head. Her voice wavered. "They say I don't make enough. They claim that I don't meet the required standards, but they don't mention her smile. They don't mention you. They don't mention what makes a family." She gave a bitter, breathless laugh. "No one asked me if I could afford to save her that night." Valor didn't understand the words, but he understood the grief. And right then, he rose onto his hind legs and gently placed both front paws on Eleanor's version of an embrace. Eleanor pressed her face into his neck and sobbed. Not out of anger. Eleanor's sobs were not driven by or motivated by anger or defiance, but from the helplessness that comes when you've done everything right, and it still isn't enough. Instead, they stemmed from the helplessness that arises beside Hope's bed, watching her sleep. Valor remained close, not leaving her side. Sometimes Hope stirred and murmured, "Va, va," her first word, not Mama, not Nana, but the name of the creature who never once let her cry alone. Eleanor wiped her eyes and stood. She walked to the kitchen and pulled out the old wooden box of paper bills, income statements, and bank records. She spread them out on the table and began scanning, desperate for anything that could prove she was trying. But the numbers didn't lie. Trying isn't always enough to keep a life. That evening, Eleanor sat down and wrote a reply. She knew it might not change a thing. But silence was not an option. "I'm not asking for money. I'm not begging for special treatment. I just want you to understand Hope is not a case file. She has a name, she has a bed, she has a dog who she calls with the first word she's ever spoken. And she has me, someone who will do everything, anything, just to keep seeing that smile each day." Valor lay beneath her chair the entire time. When she sealed the envelope, he stood. He padded over to Hope's bed and gently laid his head beside her tiny hand. Still asleep, Hope reached instinctively and curled her fingers around the edge of his ear. Eleanor watched in silence. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Just one thought echoed in her chest, unshakable and loud. "If they take her, I don't think Valor's heart or mine will ever recover." The child, whom she had once forgotten, was now asleep. Now sleeping, inches apart, sharing the same breath. She thought, "I don't even know who saved whom anymore." The night she found Hope in that rain-soaked box, Eleanor had believed it was her duty to save both of them. But now, seeing Valor asleep without tension, without twitching at shadows, without barking in dreams, she understood something deeper. She had also managed to save Valor. Hope stirred softly. Her fingers curled tighter into Valor's fur, unwilling to let go of that warmth. Valor shifted just slightly in his sleep, his brow twitching, then exhaled a long, slow breath, a sigh that sounded like surrender. Eleanor felt it in her chest. That breath. She had spent every day worrying whether Hope was breathing. But now, She noticed Valor's, too. No more shallow gasps, no more flinching, no more trembles when someone enters the room. They were breathing together, in rhythm, calm, safe. Tomorrow Hope might wake up and murmur her first syllables, maybe a garbled mama or vava. Valor would wag his tail and nuzzle her feet like always. Eleanor would make coffee that would go cold before she remembered it, and the stove would creak as it always did. But her heart had never been warmer. In this quiet home, no one needed to speak. No medals, no headlines. Just this. Two beings sleeping beside one another, sharing a silence, and knowing they belonged here. Eleanor reached for the switch and turned off the light. The room settled into soft moonlight pouring through the window slats. Hope shifted slightly, still clinging to Valor's fur. And Valor Kest, rising and falling with the soft rhythm of safety, slept on it. Valor slept deeply and peacefully. This was the first time he had slept soundly in years. Sometimes peace isn't loud. It's not grand. Sometimes peace is a nap. A small hand caresses the air, and two breaths, synced in the stillness of a world finally quiet enough to let love settle in. The letter had been sent. Eleanor didn't expect a miracle, only that someone, somewhere, would read her words and understand. But fragile hope often has to face the cold weight of reality. 3 days later, when a firm knock came at 9 a.m., Eleanor already knew. They were here. She opened the door, and standing before her was a woman in a gray coat, name badge pinned to her chest. A van idled across the street. The driver remained seated, waiting. The woman didn't wear a cold expression, but she also didn't bring comfort. "I'm Olivia," she said gently. "From the Department of Child and Family Services. I'm here to escort Hope to temporary care." Eleanor didn't respond at first. Behind her, Valor stood. He didn't bark, but his body rose with quiet, steady purpose. When Olivia stepped 1 foot closer to the doorway, Valor let out a low growl. It wasn't rage. It was awareness. The protector's instinct had returned like a flame lit behind his eyes. "Please restrain the dog," Olivia said, taking a step back. Eleanor didn't move to stop him. She simply placed her hand gently on his head, stroking once. "He knows what today is," she said softly. "And he doesn't agree." Olivia stiffened. Through the open doorway, she spotted Hope sitting in a cloth chair in the living room, sucking her thumb. The child didn't laugh, didn't cry. She simply stared directly at Valor, as if she too understood something was about to break. "We have to take her," Olivia said more firmly. "This is a legal requirement." Valor stepped forward. He blocked the door, ears upright, hackles slightly raised, but still no bark. No sound was needed. His desire was to gain understanding. Everything paused when a familiar voice called out. It was Mrs. June, the neighbor from across the street. She had heard the tension, the quiet growl, and the firm voices, and walked over, hot coffee mug in hand. "What's going on here?" she asked. "They're trying to take Hope," Eleanor said quietly, standing behind Valor. "Because I don't have enough money." June's gaze shifted from Valor, now solid and unmoving like a living wall, to the child inside, who hadn't once taken her eyes off the dog. "No," she breathed. Then, without a word, she pulled out her phone and snapped a photo. That photo would become the headline shot on every news article. A dog stands guard, refusing to let a family be torn apart. Within 2 hours, local social media went viral. The first post read, "The German Shepherd stands in the doorway, won't let the state take the baby who once clutched his ear as she slept. Address, 82 Maple Street." Others followed. We saw it with our own eyes. No barking, no aggression, just a gaze locked on a child who needed him. When Olivia called her supervisor to report the situation, a small crowd had already gathered outside. No picket signs, no shouting. People stood silently, their phones recording, their eyes waiting. A college student stepped forward and placed a printed photo on the porch. Hope asleep, tiny fingers wrapped around Valor's ear. "This," he said, "can't be undone by a policy document." Journalists arrived. Headlines followed. "Untrained dog knows right from wrong and refuses to move." A reporter asked Eleanor for a comment. She said only one thing. "I'm not asking for mercy. I'm asking, please don't separate what fate already stitched back together." The department issued a 72-hour hold. It was time to reevaluate the situation. But really it was time to let the higher-ups feel the heat. For the next 3 days, Valor never left the door. He slept on the rug near the entrance, ate beside the threshold, and every time Hope played nearby, he never changed positions, as if silently declaring, "So long as I am here, no one touches her." On the third night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She sat beside him, placing her hand gently on his back. "Tired?" she whispered. "You weren't trained for this." Valor didn't turn, but his tail gave a single quiet wag. No commands, no instruction. Only one truth mattered. Stay, no matter what. Eleanor leaned closer, her voice barely audible. "If anyone deserves to keep hope, it's you. You've never given up." Valor didn't answer, but at that moment, a soft voice broke the hush. Va. Eleanor looked up. Hope was sitting up in bed, eyes still hazy with sleep, but smiling. And in that instant, the entire house seemed to brighten. Eleanor finally comprehended that this was not a dog's resistance. It was the voice of a family, spoken through instinct, stitched in love, and carried in breaths that needed no training, only trust. On the morning of the 4th day, after 3 long nights of Valor guarding the door and an entire town quietly standing in solidarity, a single envelope appeared in Eleanor's mailbox. Stamped across the top, "Urgent summons, family court." This time they wanted to hear the story, not through forms, not through legal codes. Instead, she was guided by the voices of others. Eleanor's hands trembled as she got dressed. She chose her clean, old cotton dress and clipped her silver hair back neatly. She didn't own court shoes, only the ones she wore to work, but they would do. Valor was allowed to come. On a leash, with the red cloth collar neighbors had embroidered with the word "Guardian" in small gold thread. And Hope, nestled in Eleanor's arms, wore her tiny beige knit cap, turning her head now and then to make sure Valor was still there beside her, as if whispering, "You're still with me, right?" The courtroom was modest. Warm wood panels. Sunlight pooled gently across the floor. The space was solemn, but not cold. At the bench sat Judge Gwendolyn, around 60, with kind eyes that had clearly once known the love of a dog. After the formalities, she began. "I've reviewed all the documentation," she said, "and yes, I've seen what's been circulating online, but today I want to hear it from you directly, Mrs. Eleanor Marshall." Eleanor shifted slightly, holding Hope a little closer. Her voice was soft but steady. "I'm not perfect. I don't have much. But I have a heart that was wide enough not to turn away from a baby left crying in the freezing rain. And I have a friend who is not human, but who hasn't left Hope's side for even a moment." Valor lay at her feet. His eyes were lifted to the judge, quiet but alert, watching, listening. Eleanor continued. "Valor doesn't read legal codes. He doesn't know foster care regulations. But he knew the night she couldn't breathe. He knew to stand between her and those trying to separate us. Her voice caught. I can't offer property or pay stubs. I only have a small house, a baby I call my granddaughter, and a dog I call my family. Silence hung in the room. Judge Hart didn't take notes. She didn't look down at a file. Instead, she looked directly at Hope, now dozing peacefully in Eleanor's arms, her tiny hand still gripping the edge of Valor's scarf. After a long pause, Judge Hart spoke. There are things that can't be measured by checklists. Some bonds go beyond financial definitions, and I believe... She paused again, meeting Eleanor's eyes. Hope will remain in the care of Mrs. Eleanor Marshall. The room held still for a heartbeat. Then Eleanor exhaled, soft and trembling. Her arms pulled Hope in tighter, and she looked down at Valor. We get to stay. Although Hope didn't wake up, her lips did move while she slept. And Valor rose slightly from the floor, tail wagging. As Eleanor gathered her things, a court clerk approached. "One moment, please," she said. "The court would like to present this additional honor." She handed Eleanor a silver ID tag, smooth and chipped, with a chip embedded in the back. It read, Name: Valor Marshall Guardian, Eleanor Marshall. Status: Registered Special Child Guardian Pet. Eleanor's fingers traced over the letters. Her eyes lingered on one word, Marshall. She smiled. This time, the smile reached all the way to her eyes. From now on, she whispered, you share our name. Valor didn't understand every word, but when Eleanor bent down and clipped the tag to his collar, he wagged harder. Maybe he didn't know what the words meant, but he felt it. He had a name. A place. Someone claimed him as their own. That afternoon, neighbors lined the sidewalk when Eleanor, Hope, and Valor returned home. No one shouted. No one cheered. They just clapped softly and warmly. Hope stirred, opened her eyes, and laughed at the first face she saw. It was Valor. A little boy tugged at Mrs. June's hand and asked, So, what is Valor to the baby? She smiled, eyes glinting. He's her guardian, she said. Her first friend, her protector without a command. The boy ran up and gave Valor a sausage from his lunchbox. Valor didn't leap. He bowed his head slightly. He appeared to express gratitude. That night, in the small house at the edge of town, Eleanor sat on the couch, Hope in her lap, and Valor sprawled at her feet. Around his neck, the silver tag shimmered beneath the golden lamp. Eleanor whispered, No one will call us temporary anymore. Hope cooed, babbling soft sounds that meant nothing, and yet everything. Eleanor looked at Valor, then added, Family isn't something you're born into. It's something you choose. And we chose each other. Valor lifted his head and nuzzled into her hand. Night fell, and inside that house, 3 steady breaths rose and fell as one, enough to drown out every form, every file, every cold attempt to separate what love had already woven together. After the court's decision, peace slowly returned to the little house at the edge of town. But no one forgot what had happened. Not the long nights, not the knock on the door. The entire town stood between a child and the system. And Eleanor understood. When life gives you back what you almost lost, the only worthy way to respond is to share it. That's how Hearts for Hope was born. The May morning was warm and golden. Sunlight dappled across the freshly trimmed grass of the town's central park. Wooden tables were lined up in neat rows, balloons bobbed against the sky, and the sound of laughter filled the air. Families arrived early, hand in hand, children skipping, dogs on leashes. Some wore badges reading, Support, Hope, and Valor. Eleanor hadn't expected it to grow this fast. Just weeks ago, she'd filed a petition to keep a child. Now she stood in the middle of a full community event, a fundraiser, not only for them, but also for the story that had become bigger than their small corner of the world. Hope sat in Eleanor's arms, wrapped in a white dress with lace trim, a straw hat perched on her head. Valor walked beside them, a red scarf embroidered with Hearts for Hope tied around his neck, his silver ID tag catching glints of sun. Children crowded the front rows, waiting for a chance to pet Valor. Some offered dog biscuits. Others had face paint in the shape of puppy ears and noses. "He's my superhero," a little girl whispered to her mother, pressing her face into Valor's fur. Valor didn't do much. He didn't chase, didn't bark, and didn't pose. He was simply calm, kind, and quiet. Every so often he'd nuzzle a hand or lick a sticky finger, but his eyes always drifted back to Hope. No matter where she was, cradled in Eleanor's arms, resting in Mrs. June's lap, or nestled in her, Valor kept close. Valor remained close enough to leap forward if necessary. Eleanor received an invitation to speak on a small stage under a towering oak tree. She wasn't used to crowds, but when she saw the faces looking up at and Hope waving from the front row, calling "Va va" with pure, she smiled. "I lived alone for over 20 years, Eleanor began, her voice soft but clear. "I thought I needed nothing more from life. And then one day, fate delivered a rain-soaked box with a baby who had no name, and a dog who had no home." She paused. Her eyes shimmered. "Now I have a granddaughter. A friend bravely stood between us and the approaching storm. And I have a community that chose to walk forward with us." Applause filled the air. A few people wept quietly. Others held their phones up, recording every word. Eleanor leaned down, brushing her hand over Valor's head. "This dog was never trained. He didn't need to be. He was born to love." After the speech, a woman approached. She introduced herself as the director of a national animal welfare organization. She had an idea. "We'd love to help expand Hearts for Hope," she said. "We could fund a picture book, maybe Hope and Valor, a bedtime story." Eleanor laughed softly. "As long as it shows the ear that always droops when hope cries, any child will believe in kindness." That afternoon, between slices of apple pie and iced tea, a special moment unfolded. Hope and Valor were invited on stage together. Eleanor carried Hope up, placed her gently on a soft blanket, and then gestured for Valor to come close. He walked calmly and sat beside her. Hope reached up, her small fingers brushing his, then turned to the mic and said clearly, "Va, va." The crowd erupted. Cameras clicked. A videographer caught the moment perfectly. That photo of Hope sitting beside Valor and calling his name with all her heart would become the official image of Hearts for Hope for years to come. As the event wound down, Eleanor sat on a bench under a maple tree. Hope slept, curled in her arms. Valor stretched beneath them, his tag glinting silver beneath the amber light. The setting sun poured through the leaves, coloring the world in soft gold. Eleanor said nothing. She simply placed a hand on Valor's back, slowly stroking. She looked down at Hope's sleeping face, then whispered, "Tomorrow, we'll go back to being a family like always. But today we are proof that kindness, whether from a person or a dog, can save a child's whole world." Valor breathed deeply. A leaf drifted onto his back. He didn't move. He knew today. There was nothing to worry about. His mission had been fulfilled. But he would stay until the day Hope walked on her own, then ran, then learned to love the way he always had. Quietly, completely, and forever. The Hearts for Hope festival ended in sunshine, laughter, and a promise shared by an entire town. But as Eleanor once said, life doesn't stay peaceful for long. Just a week later, at another outdoor event where both Hope and Valor were present, things started to feel strangely familiar, until Valor sensed something no one else saw coming. It was just a regular Saturday morning. This time, the event was called Community Connect, a day for kids and pets. It was hosted at a small stadium on the east side of town. Families poured in from everywhere, bringing pets of all kinds: dogs, cats, bunnies, even a goose waddling beside a little boy in overalls. Hope sat in her stroller wearing a soft pink dress, clutching a balloon and babbling baby sounds. Eleanor walked beside her, one hand holding a bottle of milk, the other a towel. Valor walked on the left. No leash. He never needed one. He always knew exactly where to be. As always, he didn't wag his tail at strangers or run around aimlessly. He observed. He listened. He was half relaxed, half alert, always scanning, always tuned in. He had heard Hope's heart stop once. He had felt her cold, limp fingers in the crib. And today, he felt something else. It was just past 10 a.m. At the far end of the stadium, a small stage had been set up. A children's music group had just begun their performance. Kids gathered near the front, bouncing with excitement. Parents stood behind them, holding up phones to snap pictures. Valor lay curled by Hope's stroller. Then, without a sound, he sprang to his feet. His ears snapped forward, his eyes locked on the trees beyond the field, toward a narrow path that led to the overflow parking lot. Eleanor was busy twisting open the bottle cap, not paying attention. But Hope, almost like she could feel it too, turned to look in the same direction. In that split second, Valor let out a low, sharp growl and bolted. Nobody had time to react. No command, no signal, only instinct. He tore across the grass, past 2 rows of benches, weaving through a group of students dancing to the music. People shrieked, thinking he'd snapped or gone wild. But he hadn't. Valor knew exactly what he was doing. Near the edge of the stadium, a young man in a black jacket moved through the crowd. On his shoulder hung a large canvas bag. His left hand clutched the zipper. His right hand was already sliding beneath his coat. He was hiding something. Something long, black, and cold to the touch. A handgun. No one else had noticed. But Valor had already caught the scent. Metal. Cold sweat. Surging adrenaline. And a heart beating too fast, too hard, too wrong. The man was heading toward the stage. But Valor was heading straight for him. Valor was there before the man could lift the gun he pulled from his coat. He leaped high, slamming into the man's arm. His strong, focused, unshakable jaws locked around the man's wrist. A scream tore through the air. The gun dropped to the ground. The man stumbled back, trying to fight. But Valor didn't let go. He didn't bite deeper. He didn't maul. He just held on. He held on long enough for 2 nearby officers to rush in and take him down. The crowd split open. Children clung to their parents. Eleanor, holding Hope tight against her chest, ran toward Valor. He was still there, steady, as the officers gently pulled him away from the suspect. Blood had soaked into the fur on his front leg. "Valor!" Eleanor cried, her voice cracking. He turned his head. His eyes still twitched slightly from the rush of adrenaline. But when he saw Hope arms stretched toward him, softly whispering, "Vava," his whole expression softened. News spread fast. A dog had detected and stopped a potential attack. The security footage provided the rest of the story. The man had been arrested before for assault. He was released less than 2 months ago. The gun hadn't been loaded yet. That was pure luck, or maybe the result of one brave leap made without hesitation. The headlines read, "Valor, the dog who saved a baby, now saves a whole event." Online, people called him the dog who doesn't need just the right heart. That night, in the quiet living room tucked into the edge of town, Eleanor gently wiped the dried blood from Valor's leg with a warm cloth. He didn't flinch, didn't whimper. He showed no signs of pain. Hope sat in Eleanor's lap, placing her tiny hand gently on Valor's neck. "Vava," she whispered. "Brave." Eleanor looked at the one once abandoned and the other once forgotten, and now together they were the strength of an entire town. She whispered through tears, "No one made you do it, Valor, but you did it. For her, for all of us." He didn't need commands. He only needed to know one thing. Where there's hope, there's something worth protecting. After Valor stopped the armed man at the community event, admiration for him spread across the entire state. Newspapers called him a four-legged hero. But to Eleanor, no title could ever compare to the way he looked at Hope every day. He was quiet, steady, and filled with love. 1 month later, an official ceremony was held to honor him. It wasn't in City Hall or on a media stage, but in the playground of the elementary school, where Hope would one day go to class. That morning, the sky was a perfect, unusual blue. Hundreds of people gathered, children, parents, teachers, and even strangers who had never met Eleanor came bringing cookies, flowers, and handmade signs that read, "Thank you, Valor." Eleanor wore a soft blue dress. Hope sat quietly in her lap, hugging a small teddy bear. Valor, his coat freshly brushed, lay close to Eleanor's feet. His head was lifted slightly, ears alert, but his gaze stayed right where it always did, on Hope. At the small wooden podium, the school principal began the ceremony with a few gentle words. "Today, we're not just honoring a dog. We're honoring a symbol of loyalty, of unconditional love, and of a protective instinct that wasn't trained, just felt." Then came the sheriff's representative, a speaker from the Animal Rescue Center, and finally, a third-grade girl who stepped up with a folded paper in hand. She read a poem she had written herself. "You don't speak, but we all understand. You don't ask, but you always give. You're not a superhero, but you save like one. You don't wear a crown because you have hope." Applause swept across the playground. Eleanor was invited to speak. She rose, gently adjusted Hope in her arms, and took the microphone. The crowd slowly quieted. "I'm not used to public speaking," she began, "but today I'm not speaking for myself. I'm speaking for a soul without a voice, and for a little girl who once had no name called out to her." She looked down at Valor. He still lay motionless, but his eyes were fixed on her, as if listening to every word. "The day I met Hope was the day I met Valor, a child in a foam box, and a dog whose bones showed through his skin. There were no sirens. No one called for help. But Valor acted." She paused. Her voice dipped lower. "If it weren't for him, I wouldn't have a daughter." Silence fell. A breeze stirred the leaves. A few people bowed their heads. Someone wiped their eyes. Eleanor reached down and stroked Valor's head, then turned her gaze back to the crowd. Valor never asked for anything. Valor never asked for any favors or rewards. All he's ever wanted was to lie beside Hope at night, hear her laugh, and know she's safe. That's the only prize he's ever cared for. The applause this time was long and full, but Valor didn't move. He didn't need the praise. He simply tilted his head slightly and looked at Hope, who was now giggling, her little hand waving in the sunlight. After the speech, a medal was presented to Valor. Etched into the metal were the words, "For courage, loyalty, unconditional love." Eleanor fastened the medal around his neck. He didn't growl. He didn't wag his tail. He just slowly turned his head and gently licked Hope's hand, like he always did. On the walk home, Eleanor pushed Hope's stroller and walked beside Valor. People on the sidewalk waved and called his name. Children ran after them for a few steps, laughing, pointing at the dog with the medal. Eleanor leaned down and whispered, "You know, today, you're the most famous soul in this town." Valor gave a tiny flick of his ear. Fame wasn't his thing. The only sound he cared about was the soft tapping of Hope's feet kicking against the stroller behind him. As long as that sound existed, his world was complete. That night, Hope fell asleep earlier than usual. Eleanor tucked her in, then stepped back into the living room. Valor lay on the old rug, his medal catching the gentle glow of the table lamp. She sat down next to him. "You tired? You did all that without anyone asking you to?" Valor looked up at her. Eleanor smiled, her eyes glistening. "You never needed a crown. You just needed that look in your eyes, the one that says, as long as she's breathing, nothing else matters." Valor lowered his head and exhaled softly. In the warm light, the two of them, one older, one younger, stayed in sync, sharing the same breath, the same quiet. No spotlight, no audience, just each other. That summer, when Hope turned 2, Eleanor stepped into a courtroom one more time, this time with a single purpose: to become the legal mother of the child she had always called her daughter in her heart. There were no objections, no disputes. The paperwork went through in under 10 minutes. When the judge struck the gavel and declared Eleanor the official guardian of Hope, everyone in the room applauded. But Eleanor stayed still. She only looked down at Valor, resting beneath her chair. His eyes were closed, but his tail gave a faint wag. No one in that room understood better than he did the papers didn't change a thing. They only confirmed what had always been true. Hope was home. 2 years later, the Hope and Valor Foundation was born. It started as a small volunteer group. Eleanor and a few friends rescued abandoned animals and supported single mothers. But the story kept spreading, and the group grew stronger. Volunteers came from far away. An old abandoned building was transformed into a Hope Station, where stray dogs, cats, and homeless children could start again. The foundation's logo was simple: a tiny hand holding the ear of a German shepherd. Eleanor didn't need medals. Valor didn't need to be called a legend. All they needed was this place, where love could keep growing. Valor couldn't run as fast anymore. His back had started to dip, and gray hairs had taken over much of his coat. But he never left Hope's side. Every day, when Hope played in the backyard, Valor would lie beneath the old oak tree where the sunlight filtered through the leaves just right. He didn't bark. He didn't chase. He simply watched. He breathed. He stayed. One afternoon, when Hope was nearly 5, she carried a small book and shuffled a chair close to him. She sat, opened to the first page, and traced her finger along the words. "Once upon a time there was a brave dog, named Valor," she read softly, then looked up. "You still like story time, don't you?" Valor didn't answer, but his ears twitched. Hope smiled and leaned back, resting her head against his side. And in the soft breeze, with the smell of fresh grass and the sound of distant birds, Valor took a deep breath. Then let it go slow, full, and light as a falling leaf. No cry, no pain, just completion. A week later, in the backyard, Eleanor and Hope planted a small tree next to the old oak. They hung a wooden sign on its trunk that read, "This place is for the one who never gave up and always loved even when no one was looking." Each morning, Hope would sit by the tree and read. Eleanor would make tea, and somewhere in the rustling wind, in the shade on the grass, she could still feel Valor. She felt it not with her eyes, but with her heart. He was still there, His presence was evident in the eyes of hope. He was present in the eyes of every child who stepped into the shelter and embraced something for the first time. In every story told at night about a dog who never needed a crown, never asked for glory, but changed a child's life forever. Some souls aren't born to live for themselves. They're born to love, to protect, to remind us that even love without a human face can save a life.